Chapter 246. My husband has just come back from the court meeting. How did he become like this? Feng Jin's mother heard from the servants that her husband Feng Ren had come back from the court meeting, so she hurried out of the main room to welcome him. With just one glance, she found that her husband was reprimanded in the court meeting and she felt sorry for him. If he was not reprimanded, how could a neatly dressed husband come back from the court meeting with tea stains on his forehead? There has been civil unrest in Meng County in Songzhou since a few months ago. Now that a letter has been sent to the palace, it is no wonder that the emperor is not angry. Feng Ren said carelessly. He took the handkerchief from his wife and wiped his face. He sighed and said, now the civil unrest is uncontrollable and it has spread to the counties near Songzhou. People are homeless and bandits are everywhere. The 3 tribes of the northern borderline are demanding an exorbitant price. Of course, the emperor wants to vent his anger. Madame Feng looked serious and said angrily, my husband is the head of the secretariat, but the emperor doesn't even give him face. If this gets out, how can he deter the other officials in the future? Not to mention the civil unrest of the Meng family in Songzhou. Those who are not deaf or blind would know something about it. Isn't it his own fault that the emperor only got the letter now? He just wants to vent his anger on my husband. Feng Ren snorted. He did not like what the emperor was doing at the moment. However, his wife had a bad temper, and she was so protective of him. He felt warm in his heart. He could not help but raise his hand to hold Madame Feng's delicate and soft hands. I am fine. Madam, please don't get angry so easily. Anger hurts the liver. I am worried about you. Madame Feng glanced at Feng Ren and said angrily, you are going to have a family and a career. You are so old and you are still so improper. It has been so many years, but you are still so shy. It makes me look bad. Feng Ren smiled gently and the couple went back to the main courtyard hand in hand. Madame Feng asked the servants to prepare hot soup so that Feng Ren could take a comfortable bath and change into a clean spring shirt. Alas, even so. Feng Ren sat in front of the table. His wife was holding an embroidery rod and was carefully embroidering a black plum blossom picture. Your behavior has indeed disappointed many officials. They are always having fun in Shangyang Palace and don't care about the outside world. Which emperor did not want to wield the power of the world and lie on the knees of beauties when drunk? Now, the emperor of Dongqing had been practicing the latter. Shangyang Palace was a real harem with 3,000 beauties. His Majesty had also issued a palace order that all the women in the palace were not allowed to wear underwear so that he could have fun at any time. Every time Feng Ren entered the palace, he did not dare to take a second look, for fear that he would see something unsightly. If that was the case, it would have been fine, but the emperor just had to like to go to the homes of his ministers for a short visit. Who knew how many wives of his ministers had been fooled by him? It was absurd beyond compare. Compared to the previous emperor of Dongqing, Emperor Yang of Qing, it was no less frightening. He had ascended the throne for many years, but the number of times he attended court could be counted on one hand. Indulging in beauty, unable to extricate himself. Occasionally, Feng Ren also doubted whether he would die on a woman's belly because of his indulgence in lust. Although the aristocratic families were now in power, this had a lot to do with the emperor's indulgence in sensual pleasures and neglect of court affairs. The more power the aristocratic families had, the more they impeded the imperial power. The more the emperor could not enjoy the pleasure of ruling over the world. He was controlled everywhere, and the more he indulged in sensual pleasures, the less he cared about court affairs. And the more power the aristocratic families had, the more it was a vicious cycle. He was ambitious but did not like to manage court affairs. He wanted to suppress the aristocratic families and regain his power, but he did not have the ability. How could there be such a good thing in the world? The current emperor of Dongqing, other than having more sons than his brother and being able to sleep with several women at night, had nothing else to show. Feng Ren was calm. Even if he was called to the study room by the emperor and smashed a cup of tea, he could still chat with his wife calmly. Who cares? Madame Feng said carelessly. They have been crazy for a long time. Look at you, there's a cut on your forehead. Put some ointment on it and don't eat much for a few days, in case there's a scar left after you recover. Other than the first emperor of Dongqing, who had some achievements and ambition, the others were useless and useless. If it was not for the fact that the Feng family needed people in the imperial court, she would not want her husband to be the head of the secretariat. It was said that the emperor was dead and the aristocratic families were made of iron. No matter how bad the Feng family was, it would not be that bad. It did not matter if the royal family wanted to die or not. Her husband had written 4 or 5 memorials to remind the emperor about the Tsang prefecture and Meng county. However, the emperor was busy with his new favorite. If it was not for important matters, he did not want to see Feng Ran at all. The memorials he wrote 2 years ago were still gathering dust. Why would he read the memorials Feng Ran wrote a few months ago? Now he was angry? What was the use? I am worried about Huayu. He is now with the 4th prince. I don't know if he will run into mobs on the way. The children will have their own fortune. Don't you always say that? Why are you so worried when Erlang has only been away for a few months? Madame Feng put the embroidery cloth beside her and took out a sealed letter from the table. Huayu, you care too little about him. He took the letter and saw that it was written by Lu Shi. Feng Ren said. He only found out about Feng Jin's situation a few years ago. At that time, Feng Jin's character had already formed. He wanted to correct it but was afraid that it would backfire. He could only blame his wife for paying too much attention to the eldest son and loving the youngest son. They neglected the second son. Erlang is already at the age to start a family. Why are you more worried than me? What did Lu Feng write? Feng Ren read quickly. He lowered his eyebrows and smiled. Madam, you just laughed at me for being frivolous. Look at him. He is frivolous. He gave up his job as the county chief and came to be a matchmaker. Madame Feng did not avoid the topic. She picked up the letter and read it carefully. She had an idea. I have never heard of this lady from the Wei family. Feng Jin's brother had been engaged and it was his turn now. So Madame Feng had been looking for suitable ladies for the past 6 months. She was hesitating. I don't know what her temperament is. You can find out if you check. I am afraid that the lady that Lu Shi likes is not too bad. Feng Ren said, the Wei family in Hejian. Huayu can be a good match. If she has a good temperament and Huayu has no objection, she can be chosen. The Feng family was a big family. Feng Jin's brother was the eldest son of the legal wife. His wife would be the future wife of the family. Naturally, they had to carefully select her. Her family background, talent, and appearance must be good. But Feng Jin was the second son of the legal wife, so the requirements were not so strict. It was not that they did not treat Feng Jin well. They were afraid that sisters-in-law with similar status would easily have thoughts that they should not have, which would not be good for the family. Therefore, the status of Feng Jin's wife was not important. They valued her character, talent, and temperament more. If there was a shrewd and ambitious woman who instigated Feng Jin and his brother to fight for the family property, it would not work. Chapter 247. Lu Shi and Feng Ran were friends of gentlemen, and they had a good relationship in private. They usually talked about their literary ideals and political affairs. They rarely talked about their work. This kind of friendship and the way they got along with each other made Feng Ran feel relaxed. Naturally, their relationship was not bad. My husband always said that Lu County Chief was an idiot. I believe it now. Madame Feng put the letter away with a smile. Although it was an encrypted letter, there was nothing shameful in it. It was nothing more than talking about daily life, describing what had happened in the past few years, expressing his longing, and acting as a matchmaker. He talked about how he was about to leave for Shangjing and didn't have a place to stay. He asked Feng Ren to help him arrange a place so that he wouldn't have to sleep in the open. The content was humorous. It didn't sound like the tone of the famous Lu County Chief at all. It sounded more like a boy who hadn't grown up. Hee. He's even more idiotic. Feng Ren opened his mouth, but he suddenly thought of something and stopped. He said vaguely, anyway, you can't just judge a person by his appearance. He looks beautiful, but inside, he's a pervert. Feng Ran and his wife had been married for many years and their relationship was getting better and better. They talked for a while and got up to have dinner together. At the same time, the news that Feng Ran, the head of the secretariat, was reprimanded by the emperor and even smashed a teacup had spread to all the families in Shangjing. Those with ordinary family backgrounds felt insecure. Those with great power in the court just looked on coldly. They all thought that Feng Ran would be angry and stay at home for a few days after being wronged. They didn't know that he still did what he was supposed to do the next day. Except for the mark on his forehead, there was no difference. Some old officials who were clear-minded couldn't help but sigh when they saw it. The emperor had completely offended Feng Ren. So what if he was the head of the secretariat? There were countless high-ranking officials in the Feng family. Would they care about the position of the head of the secretariat? It seemed to be an important position, but in fact, the emperor was always afraid of Feng Ren and the Feng family. Under such circumstances, how could they expect the Feng family to serve the country wholeheartedly? Feng Ren didn't get angry, not because he had a good temper, but because it wasn't worth getting angry. Due to the civil unrest in Meng County of Tsong Prefecture, the surrounding counties were affected as well. The people were wailing in pain and suffering. Along the way, people in ragged clothes could be seen everywhere. Many of the refugees from Meng County had fled to other counties with their children, creating a huge security and public order problem for the local area. The roving bandits took the opportunity to wreak havoc, burning, killing, and looting. In such a big environment, Hejin County seemed to be exceptionally peaceful. Most of the bandits had been cleaned up by Jiang Pengji. She selected some of them and incorporated them. Not only did they not become a hidden danger, but they contributed to the peace around Hejin County. While other places were immersed in dark clouds, this place seemed peaceful. The purchase restriction in the grain store was carried out smoothly. The other gentry families in Hejin County didn't dare to vent their anger when they saw that the leader was from the Liu family. What was more surprising was that the grain store of the Wei family also took the initiative to adjust the policy and limited the people's purchase at a low price. At least they know how to return the favor. Liu Shi smiled faintly when he heard the news. Jiang Pengji rolled her eyes and asked, "Did father really step forward to be a matchmaker for Jing-er and Huayu?" Liu Shi snorted. What else? If they didn't have such a handsome son-in-law, how could the Wei family be so generous? When Jiang Pengji implemented the purchase restriction, although the Wei family didn't kick them when they were down, they were just watching from the sidelines. Now that Jiang Pengji had introduced the purchase restriction, no one would believe it if they didn't have a secret deal. If that's the case, I'm relieved. Huayu is a noble person. He will treat Jingxian well. Jiang Pengji didn't think too much about it. Wei Jingxian marrying Feng Jin was better than marrying Wuma Jun, wasn't it? Other things aside, Feng Jin's character was still trustworthy. Liu Shi secretly shook his head. His daughter was so kind. Based on the current situation, the marriage between Feng Jin and Wei Jingxian seemed to be perfect, but in the future, his daughter might have to bear double the pain. But it was too early to say that. Who knew what the future would be like? Liu Shi skipped the topic and said to Jiang Pengji, "It will be the autumn harvest in a month, and I will be going to Shangjing to meet the emperor. Ask your aunt to prepare the things you will need on the way. It's your first time going out, so you should be well prepared." "Okay," Liu Shi said. "Pick some of the troops to follow us and protect us on the way. The rest will stay in Hejin County." Jiang Pengji's troops had expanded to 1,500 people, and that was the result of her careful selection. She couldn't take all 1,500 people with her. At most, she could take 40 to 50 people with her. The rest had to stay where they were. Jiang Pengji nodded. In fact, she didn't want to expose all of them. The quality of the troops varied. Everyone needed to be polished and trained. Even if Liu Shi didn't say so, she would do it anyway. "Father, don't worry. I have asked Xiaoyu to pick suitable followers. The rest will stay in Hejin County for now. Wenjing will take care of them." Although Qiguan Rang hadn't officially joined the team, Jiang Pengji didn't want to waste such a good labor force. Suka definitely couldn't stay, but Meng Hun still couldn't manage a troop of 1,000 people neatly. After all, internal affairs weren't his strong point. Besides, his current identity was a little sensitive, and he needed to avoid the Mengs. Most of the time, he couldn't appear openly. Fortunately, Qiguan Rang would stay in Hejin County. He could more or less take over Suka's work, so she didn't have to worry about the troops. Although the departure would take more than a month, the preparations had already begun. In the ancient times, when transportation and information were not developed, it was not easy to travel far. Jiang Pengji habitually broadcast every day. Because the content was monotonous and boring, she didn't meet any interesting people or things. Most of the time, it was the audience who entertained themselves with the bullet screen. Jiang Pengji sometimes read the bullet screen to kill time. Unknowingly, the autumn harvest was approaching. The fields were yellow, and farmers and tenants were working everywhere. The purchase restriction that had lasted for 2 months had also come to an end, and the price of grain had returned to normal. The stone that had been pressing down on everyone's hearts had finally been removed. From the adults to the children, everyone revealed a relaxed and happy smile, temporarily forgetting the chaos in the outside world. The number of the troops stabilized at 1,500 people. Their main task was to train. Occasionally, they would have other additional tasks. For example, farm work. Because the civil unrest hadn't been effectively controlled, the outside world was still relatively chaotic. People were rushing to harvest the grain. They were afraid that the harvest would be ruined if they were late. However, every household was understaffed, so the harvest was not fast. Jiang Pengji happened to hear the tenants talking about it. After discussing with Xueqi, they decided to rent out all the troops to do farm work. They were strong, hard-working, and they only needed to eat their fill every day. Xueqi was speechless. He really didn't want to say that he knew this handsome Lang Jun. Chapter 248. Lang Jun, you mustn't. Xueqi moved quickly, intending to stop Jiang Pengji, who wanted to help. It was not that he thought she was a noble person and could not work like a farmer, but that he was busy enough and did not want to add to the mess. Jiang Pengji turned her head and asked Xueqi in confusion, "Why are you stopping me? There are no monsters in the fields." At that moment, the audience in the streaming room had started to become teachers, teaching Jiang Pengji how to do farm work. Even if she did not know how to do it before, she could now follow the guide given by her friends in the streaming room. Xueqi was looking down on her. Xueqi was speechless. After a while he said, "Lang Jun, you are a noble person. How can you work like a peasant?" Jiang Pengji tilted her head and looked at him with a faint look in her eyes. "Speak like a human." Xueqi's face turned green. After a while he said, "We are busy with the autumn harvest. Lang Jun, don't add to the mess." Jiang Pengji was speechless. She did not want to look at the ha on the streaming screen. In the past, it was always Xueqi who felt sorry for him. This time, it was her turn to feel sorry for him. Lao Ciji Lianming, light a candle for this honest boy. He actually said that. Zuizhen Beishijing, I was drinking and almost choked. Xueqi was looking for trouble. Even if he thought that, he could not say it out loud. I think the streamer's expression is about to change. Hey, young man, you have to be careful. He is going to make things difficult for you. Mo Wu Huashi, #propping chin. Xueqi is not following the routine. According to the usual routine, he should be secretly moved. After all, the streamer was willing to put down her pride and work in the fields. It was a necessary quality for a wise ruler, but he actually despised the streamer. Yun Qimao. Do any of you remember the streamer's background? Speaking of which, did she still see crops in her era? I really wonder if the streamer knew which were grains and which were straws. Jiang Pengji was shot in the knee. She had indeed never seen real crops. It was like the audience in the streaming room had never seen a pig run, but they had eaten pork. But they could not look down on her knowledge just because of that, okay? Host V, don't you have the bullet screen to guide us? Lao Ciji Lianming, most of them are from Baidu. I don't know if they are useful. Jiang Pengji was speechless. Nai Bao Bao. Actually, I'm curious. Agriculture still existed in the host's era, right? Fully automatic machines are used for harvesting? Jiang Pengji stared at Xueqi silently, but he didn't budge. She squatted on the ridge of the field and looked at the farmers who were working. It looked like he was defeated, but he was actually chatting with the audience in the live broadcast room. Host V. Do you know what it means to be a farmer in my time? 2 words, rich. The viewers in the live stream room expressed their shock and sent a series of exclamation marks. How much money can you make from farming? Jiang Pengji thought about it and used a very vivid metaphor to give them a general idea. Host V. All of you have seen the Great Universal Geographical Map of Dongqing, right? You know the approximate size of this country. The audience in the live streaming room expressed that they knew about it. After all, the Great Geographical Map of Dongqing was hanging in her study room. It was hard not to see it. In terms of land area, it was about 1/6 of their era's Hua nation, and slightly larger. This was the result of a data guru in the live broadcast room after combining the various data provided by the host. And then, Host V, it looks like a large land area, but it's about the size of a small or medium-sized farm. In other words,
The land area of the Emperor of Dongqing is less than that of a small or medium-sized farm owner in her time.
The audience in the live streaming room. Lao Cg Lianming. I may have drunk fake wine and watched fake live streams. I suddenly can't look at the term farm owner. Xiao Gue. Can't look at it directly +1. I suddenly feel that my family's rural household is suddenly much more lofty. Moonlight treasure box. Can't look at it directly +2. The urban household is trembling. A farm that was 1/6 of the land area of Hua Nation was completely unimaginable. However, would a farm owner be able to manage such a large farm? He should be able to, right? But they couldn't imagine what it would be like. Lao Cg Lianming. Wait a minute. I seem to have analyzed a very scary fact. If there were such large farms in the host's time, obviously the Earth could no longer meet the needs of the farm owners. Would there be the existence of agricultural planets? In other words, the host's time was already interstellar. Just like what many interstellar novels imagined, there were many planets in the universe that were suitable for the survival of living creatures. Some planets were specially divided for farming, which gave rise to such terrifying farm owners. The audience in the live streaming room were all excited after being reminded by him. Jiang Pengji didn't know what they were excited about. She quietly looked at the 2 or 3 tenant farmers who were working together on a piece of land. The audience in the live streaming room couldn't imagine how the farm owners in her time managed such a large farm as Dongqing because they had never seen it with their own eyes. Jiang Pengji hadn't seen the autumn harvest with her own eyes, so she couldn't imagine how the farmers harvested the grain. Xueqi saw that Jiang Pengji was so quiet and he felt anxious. He changed his words and said, "If you're really curious, you should get a tenant farmer who is familiar with the field to guide you. The grain seems to be nothing, but if it's harvested improperly, it can easily cause lumbar muscle strain and scratches on the hands and feet." Jiang Pengji tilted her head and looked at him. "Then go find a tenant farmer." The audience in the live streaming room could only copy and paste on Baidu. They were no better than her. Xueqi had no choice but to get up and find an experienced tenant farmer. He hoped that his Lang Jun would know the difficulty and stop tormenting herself. "Why don't you use tools?" Jiang Pengji's understanding of the ancient times was limited. Even if she came to this era and searched for information from books in the outside world, she still needed to see many things with her own eyes. She didn't have the actual objects in her mind, so she couldn't imagine it. The old tenant farmer was in fear and trepidation. "Lang Jun, there are farming tools, but they are rare and the cattle are precious. Usually, 3 or 4 households share them. When one household finishes harvesting, it's the next one's turn. If they are experienced, their speed isn't slow. In fact, it relied more on manpower than the power of tools." Jiang Pengji followed the direction of the old tenant farmer's finger and saw a farmer using rough farming tools. She frowned slightly. She couldn't imagine using manpower to harvest the grain. Not to mention the big farm owners. Even the small farm owners wouldn't be able to harvest all the grain in their lifetime. Chapter 249. Old man, please teach me how to do it. I'll learn. Jiang Pengji smiled. She rolled the wide hem up to her knees and secured it with a rope, revealing a pair of slender white calves. As for the sleeves, she tied them up with a rope to make it easier for her to walk. Xiao Gue. The rope to secure the sleeves looks like it's from Japan. Lao Cg Lianming. Sleeves, also known as arm ropes. They're not from Japan. In fact, people in ancient China used ropes to secure sleeves so that they wouldn't get in the way of their work. But no one was wearing a robe with wide sleeves, so they didn't need it. Well, he was being taught a lesson. Jiang Pengji secured the sleeves with Xueqi's help. She stood beside the old tenant farmer and listened attentively to him teaching her how to harvest the grains. After all, the old tenant farmer had worked in the fields his whole life, so he was very experienced. Although he was old and had gray hair on his temples, he was no slower than the young men. He was even faster than them. At that moment, Xueqi keenly sensed that his Longjuan's mood was a bit weird. He thought to himself, does Lang Jun think it's too difficult? However, the scene that followed refreshed his worldview and limits. Lang Jun, who was thought to be inattentive and inattentive, only needed to watch it once. The old tenant farmer told her some things to pay attention to, and she was able to do it by herself. "Lang Jun, you're really smart. You're much smarter than my grandson." The old tenant farmer was so happy that he complimented her, But he realized he had said something wrong after he finished. How could they compare the status of his grandson and the Lang Jun in front of him? If his grandson couldn't learn this skill, he would probably starve to death. Lang Jun, on the other hand, could live a luxurious life even though she didn't know what the grains looked like. When he thought of this, the old tenant farmer was so scared that his legs trembled. His face turned pale, and he almost fell to his knees. Unexpectedly, Jiang Pengji revealed a very happy smile and spoke to him in a gentle and soft voice. It's not hard to see, but you need to pay attention to your posture and strength. Otherwise, your whole body will hurt. The old tenant farmer didn't know how to control his posture and strength, but he had accumulated a lifetime's worth of experience. Xueqi stood to the side, and his face turned slightly better. Jiang Pengji didn't seem to realize that the old tenant farmer had said something offensive. Instead, she quickly harvested the rest of the rice. A quarter of an hour later, she sat on the ridge of the field, swinging her two slender white legs. Her forehead was faintly covered in a thin layer of sweat. Lang Jun, do you want to apply some medicine? Xueqi held a small brown bottle in his hand, which contained a plaster that could remove blood stasis and stop bleeding. Jiang Pengji looked at his hand, then looked at her calves and feet, which were scratched by the grains and foreign objects. She understood and shook her head. She pointed to the seat beside her and gestured for him to sit down. That old farmer didn't mean to offend you. Xueqi was sensitive to other people's emotions, and he had a better understanding of his Lang Jun. He knew that she was not in a good mood. No matter how he thought about it, it seemed like the old tenant farmer's words were the only thing that offended him and made him unhappy. However, Xueqi was wrong this time. Jiang Pengji had many flaws. She was capricious, arrogant, and unruly. It seemed to be a common failing of the aristocratic families in this era. However, Jiang Pengji was different from those people. She would not hurt the weak and innocent, not to mention that the old farmer had no ill intentions. Are you pleading on behalf of someone else? Jiang Pengji couldn't help but laugh. She said, Xiaoyu, the premise of pleading is that you have to understand the whole story and know the truth. Otherwise, not only will your pleading fail, but it will also add fuel to the fire. I am not angry because of that. Xueqi said seriously, but you are indeed not in a good mood. Jiang Pengji smiled and asked him in return, then do you know why I am not happy? Xueqi was dumbfounded. He even suspected that it was not that she was in a bad mood, but that she was simply using this as a pretext to torment him. Xueqi cupped his hands in front of his chest. His cheeks were slightly red. I don't understand. Please enlighten me. Jiang Pengji did not answer his question. Instead, she asked, do you think I was a burden when I harvested the grains? Xueqi was speechless. Sure enough, it was directed at him. Before Xueqi could recover from his confusion, Jiang Pengji continued, don't think that I look fine now. In fact, my back is aching. Farm work is not something that can be done with strength. If you don't know how to save energy, your muscles will definitely swell and your whole body will ache. Xueqi listened to her quietly and looked at her profile. To be honest, he always felt that his Langjuan's face was a bit too delicate, like a girl's. But that was the trend nowadays. Men had to put on incense, put on flowers, and dress gorgeously when they went out. A group of enchanting bitches. It was normal for her Lang Jun to look delicate. After all, she was still young, and it was hard to distinguish her gender. When she got older, the difference would be huge. It's too hard. Jiang Pengji's current physical fitness was trash in her eyes, but compared to her peers and even adult men, she was a crane in a flock of chickens. With such fitness, she actually felt a bit tired after working for 15 minutes on the farm. She felt that it was not worth it. The hard work and the results were completely disproportionate. But even though she thought that way, the others felt that she was very capable and had a high level of understanding. She was no worse than the experienced tenants. They were not from the same era, so there was a huge gap in their thinking. Lang Jun, you don't have to work so hard, Xueqi said. Her identity was different from those tenants. The latter needed to rely on the land, but she did not have to do anything to live a luxurious life. You're wrong to think that way. Jiang Pengji clasped her fingers together and rested her elbows on her knees. I personally went down to the fields to experience it. Only then did I feel that the tenants are working hard. The hard work and sweat of the people are not equal to their harvest. Xueqi was secretly surprised.
There were many things that were not equal in this world. If every household had access to more advanced farming tools, it wouldn't take much effort to reap an acre of land without breaking a sweat, and it would increase efficiency.
Zhang Pengji murmured. The idea she had in her head couldn't be implemented in this world. She had to compromise and come up with other ideas. A field that would normally take 2 hours to reap can be done in half a cup of tea's time. Xueqi was speechless. Did his Lang Jun? Did she go crazy from working in the fields? I need to go back and think about it. You'll be responsible for the things here. Whoever dares to slack off will be drilled to death by the head instructor. Zhang Pengji seemed to have an idea. She got up and put on the wooden clogs, ignoring Xueqi. Xueqi was speechless. Hey, don't stop halfway through. It's so uncomfortable to keep me in suspense. He reached out his hand, but his Lang Jun walked like he was flying. He could walk in the fields with those wooden clogs as if he was walking on flat ground. Chapter 250. What are you drawing, Lang Jun? Takshu stroked her long sleeves with one hand and ground an ink block with the other. The air was filled with the fragrance of ink. Zhang Pengji dipped the brush in the ink and started writing on the bamboo paper. The ink lines of different thicknesses were arranged in picturesque disorder on the drawing paper. In a short while, a strange picture was formed. However, no matter how Takshu looked at it, she could not tell what it was. Something useful. Zhang Pengji drew a book from the shelf halfway through. She opened it and read it carefully. Then she sat back at the table and started to make changes on the drawing paper. If it's feasible, it might be of great use. Zhang Pengji wanted to improve the farming tools and use external help to improve work efficiency and save manpower. If she was asked to toss about problems such as mechanical design or aircraft carrier energy core, her academic level would definitely not be able to handle it. However, if it was just designing simple wooden machinery, the difficulty would be greatly reduced. Not to mention, the audience in the live broadcast room could also provide her with friendly reference materials. Therefore, it was not difficult for her to improve the farming tools. The real difficulty was that the tools had to be in line with the current level of technology. She also had to manufacture the tools that she designed. At the same time, she had to consider the cost and maintenance issues. At least, the time and manpower needed to manufacture the tools could not be more than the resources that could be saved by using the tools. Zhang Pengji continued to paint while Takshu stared at her with a confused face. As Lu Shi's personal maid, she had read some books. She was good at writing, but that was all. Nowadays, paintings were more about the artistic conception than the real scene. It was abstract and had meaning. Takshu naturally did not understand three-dimensional paintings. She guessed that no one could understand what she was drawing except for Zhang Pengji and the audience in the streaming room. Lang Jun, it must be very important. Takshu nodded and continued to grind the ink for Zhang Pengji. After a while, she saw that Zhang Pengji had finally stopped. She asked in a low voice, Lang Jun, do you need some hot soup to cleanse yourself? Zhang Pengji rode a horse back to the mansion after finishing the farm work. Her calves were exposed, and there were mud stains on them. Her sleeves were stained, and she was sweating. If the gatekeeper did not recognize her face, he would not have let her in. Just based on her previous appearance, people would believe it if they said that she was a tenant farmer of some family. Yes, go and prepare a set of clean clothes. If you didn't mention it, I wouldn't have realized it. I do feel a little uncomfortable. Zhang Pengji was not a clean freak. After all, she was a genetic warrior in her previous life. When she carried out missions assigned by her superiors, what kind of harsh environment had she not encountered? Not to mention getting half of their bodies covered in mud, it was common for them to be stained with the enemy's blood, flesh, and filth. But now that the conditions allowed it, she didn't like to mistreat herself. Zhang Pengji temporarily turned off the live stream and took a shower. She wore a green Confucian robe and sat in front of the table. Her long hair was still damp. Turning on the live broadcast again, her gaze fell on the drawing paper on the desk. Her brows furrowed imperceptibly before relaxing. Why haven't I seen Xuanmei recently? Zhang Pengji dried her wet hair with a towel in one hand and continued to make changes on the drawing paper with the other. Takshu continued to grind and said, Xuanmei has been keeping watch at night recently. Lang Jun sleeps early, so he naturally did not see her. Why do you want to see her? Oh, Zhang Pengji said. I just remembered something. Didn't I decide to go to Shangjing with my father? Both of you plan to bring only one of them. It's a long journey, and little girls can't take it. So I want to ask if you are willing to follow me. Takshu giggled. Lang Jun, you've forgotten about yourself. You've suffered, let alone me and Xuanmei. Since I'm Longjuan's maid, I'll follow you wherever you go. There's no reason for me to be unwilling to go. Xuanmei would say the same thing if you asked her. But why do you want me and Xuanmei to stay at home? Jiang Pengji shook her head and answered directly, I'm going to study, not to seek pleasure. I don't need too many people to serve me. Even so, you can't mistreat yourself. Takshu looked at her with hope. I want to follow you. Jiang Pengji did not agree immediately. She only said that she would ask for Xuanmei's opinion. Due to the elimination of some stubborn and cruel bandits, the autumn harvest in Hejian County was relatively peaceful. Plus, there was a small bumper harvest, so there was more or less some surplus grain. Jiang Pengji asked Xueqi to calculate the money earned from the few thousand on of grain, and then purchase grain elsewhere at a lower price. Going back and forth, the original 5,000 don of grain could be multiplied. With the grain, Jiang Pengji, the poor person, had a slightly fuller purse. Xueqi was becoming more and more like a meticulous housekeeper. His abacus was crackling, and he could split a penny into two. There was still a lot of room for the grain they earned. He said that it was all because of his Lang Jun. This is. Before leaving, Jiang Pengji climbed over the wall and left the manor. She climbed over Wei Yuan's wall again to look for Qiguan Rang. Qiguan Rang, who almost thought that it was a night attack, was speechless. He pulled his cloak together and took a drawing from Jiang Pengji. There was a drawing of a strange object on it. It's an improved farming tool. Jiang Pengji took a sip of tea. But I have too little experience. This kind of imaginary thing can't achieve the desired effect. I'm handing this over to you. I've also talked to the carpentry workshop in the Lu Manor. You can discuss with the carpentry workshop about how to make it into a usable object. Qiguan Rang listened to her in shock. He suddenly thought of the improved crossbow and was speechless. If Lang Jun can solve this problem, you may become a person who is not inferior to the Mahists. It was a pity that Lu Shi's talent was not limited to farming, but to the world. Jiang Pengji ignored his words and continued, do it in private. Don't let anyone know. Qiguan Rang was from this era, so he understood the pros and cons of it. He cupped his hands and said, don't worry, Lanting. Jiang Pengji said, okay. Thank you. Qiguan Rang was smart and suspicious. Jiang Pengji climbed over the wall to look for him in the middle of the night, and it was the night before they left. He put away the drawing and asked, Lang Jun, do you suspect that there's something wrong with you? Yes. Unexpectedly, Jiang Pengji answered the question. But that's not the main reason. It's just one of the reasons. The other reason is that it's convenient for Wenjing to stay in Hejian. I'll be in Langyi for a while, so I won't be able to take care of him. Then. Chapter 251. The next day, before dawn, 4 carriages quietly left the city under the protection of 50 guards. Although the real owners were Lu Shi and his father, they had prepared 4 carriages. Lu Shi had 1 carriage, Jiang Pengji had another, and the respectable servants had another. The last carriage was filled with miscellaneous items such as clothes, food, clean water, money, and other items to keep warm. The parcels of the entourage and guards were also placed in that carriage. That was after several reductions. According to what the second lady and madam who had prepared, there would have been at least 6 carriages. To put it simply, it was not easy to go on a long journey in ancient times when all aspects of living conditions were abnormally backward. The viewers in the streaming room were shocked and learned something new. Jun Muyi. When I watched TV series, I felt that the actors and actresses were all light and simple when they went out. They basically brought a servant girl and a manservant. So, those were fake TV series. The streamer's extravagance is the correct way to go out in ancient times? Jing Hong Yulong. Tisk, it's really an entourage. It's so awesome. I feel that the streamer didn't suffer a loss on this trip. Many viewers were very envious. They wished they could experience such luxurious treatment for the streamer. Of course, there were some who were more rational. Lao Ciji Lianming. So jealous. Can you believe the TV series? Do you know how undeveloped transportation was in ancient times? Not only transportation, but even the roads were the same. Things like courier stations could not be everywhere. It was common to not see a single living person for 3 to 5 days after a long journey. There were no villages and no shops. Without enough food and water, were they going to starve or die of thirst? Those who had the means to travel far would naturally consider all aspects and take into consideration any unexpected situations. Those who did not have the means could only carry a parcel and some dry food. Everything was light and simple. Not only was the speed slow, but they would also encounter all kinds of dangers along the way. The ancient world was not like the modern world that the audience was living in. There were many tall buildings in the modern world, which greatly reduced the living space of wild animals. Many people had eaten pork, but they had never seen a pig run. However, the ancient world was different. There were dangerous animals running around, and snakes often visited homes. Shaggy Gongji. No, did the person above eat dynamite today? I was just envious. Do you have to be so angry? The bullet screen in the streaming room was filled with the smell of gunpowder. Jiang Pengji did not care. She leaned half of her body on the table and rested. They hadn't left Hejian County yet, so the vibration of the carriage was still within an acceptable range. However, as it was approaching noon, the carriage jolted violently. The audience in the live stream room wondered if the carriage would break apart from the jolting. Jinghong Wandering Dragon. All of a sudden, I'm not envious anymore. I can endure it for a while, but after a while, my bones will be shattered. There were even some audience members who said that the camera was shaking so much that their eyes hurt and they felt a little nauseous. He's already on the main road? Jiang Pengji lifted her hand and lifted the curtain of the carriage. The scenery outside had already turned into a rustling autumn scene. Takshu did not sit in the third carriage. Instead, she followed Jiang Pengji. Judging from the time, we should have left the official road by now. Your servant has prepared a cushion so that you won't feel uncomfortable from the bumps. Why was the traffic in ancient times so blocked? Outdated transportation was one of the reasons. Another important reason was that the roads in this era were not good. Apart from the smoothness and spaciousness of the official road, there wasn't even a road anywhere else. The Lu Mansion's carriage had a more advanced shock absorption system, but it was still so bumpy, let alone an ordinary carriage. No need. I'm going out to ride for a while. Jiang Pengji's physical fitness was excellent, but such a bumpy carriage was too much for her, let alone the frail ancient people. Lu Shi was speechless when he saw Jiang Pengji riding on a tall horse. Naughty girl, be careful on the horse, he reminded her. Riding in a carriage was actually more uncomfortable than riding a horse. He thought that his daughter had gotten off because she couldn't stand the bumps. Okay. Jiang Pengji rode the horse and followed the carriages leisurely. The sun gradually rose in the sky and shone on her body, making her feel warm. It was not convenient to travel in ancient times. Fortunately, Lu Shi was experienced and had prepared everything he could. Lu Shi lifted the curtain of the carriage and said to Jiang Pengji, "Let's stop and rest for a while. Eat something." Okay. Jiang Pengji responded and informed the carriages to rest in place. Everyone had something to eat before they continued their journey. Xiaoyu, look at your face. Are you sick? When Xueqi got off the carriage, his pale face caught her attention. Look at his lips, they've turned deathly pale. At this moment, Xueqi felt that his whole body was about to fall apart. His legs gave way and he almost knelt on the ground. In such a difficult situation, his Longjuan's teasing laughter rang in his ears, making him feel even more hopeless. It took him a long time to straighten his back. Xueqi managed to maintain his elegance and smiled at Jiang Pengji. But the smile was very forced. Set up a campfire over there and boil some water to cook jerky. You can drink some later. If the carriage is too bumpy, you can ride a horse. Jiang Pengji was not worried that Xueqi did not know how to ride a horse. The 6 arts of gentlemen were skills that all students in that era had to master. Xueqi cupped his hands and thanked her. Thank you, Lang Jun. What are you thanking me for? Didn't you ask for it? Jiang Pengji looked him up and down with teasing eyes and said in a low voice, Xuanmei went to see you yesterday, right? Alas, if you weren't a blockhead and didn't understand a girl's mind, you would still have a beautiful companion. Xueqi's face turned pale and then green. He hurriedly said,
Lang Jun, don't misunderstand. Xuanmei is not. In a rich family, the Longjuan's personal maids were mostly concubines. How could Xueqi dare to think about it? Why are you in such a hurry? Zhang Pengji approached him and sneered. Xuanmei came back with red eyes. Xueqi kept his mouth shut. I treat her like my own sister. I don't have any other thoughts. Plus, Xuanmei has her own thoughts. She may not be willing to be a concubine of a rich family. She likes you very much. Zhang Pengji opened her mouth and Xueqi lowered his head. What do you think? Ku rejected Xuanmei. Xueqi's voice was as soft as a mosquito. His cheeks were slightly red. Actually, I don't think Xuanmei's choice is a good one. You are not a good match. Xueqi was not good at the moment, but he had a bright future. Zhang Pengji was confident in Xueqi and herself. There were too few men in that era who had their original intentions. Chapter 252. Zhang Pengji crossed her arms and leaned against the side of the carriage. Xueqi felt more and more uncomfortable. He didn't even know where to put his hands. But that girl is quite silly and stubborn. You should know why she chose to stay in Hejin County, right? Xueqi didn't say anything. He didn't know how to respond. He didn't know at first, but since his Lang Jun said so, he naturally understood. She stayed in Hejin County to take care of his aunt. Xuanmei's character was like her name. She was gentle and very kind. It seems that you understand. Zhang Pengji patted his shoulder and whispered with a smile. If you like Xuanmei, remember to come to me and ask for her hand in marriage. If you don't like her, you should make up your mind as soon as possible. Don't waste her time. Xueqi smiled helplessly. His Longjuan's temperament was too unexpected. The audience in the streaming room witnessed the whole conversation. Many people who liked the master-servant couple expressed their heartache. Streamer, you are not a qualified woman from another world. Do you understand? Also, when did Xuanmei and Xueqi hook up? I understand. Xueqi cupped his hands in front of his chest and kept his head down. Only his exposed ears were slightly red. After a short rest and a full meal, they continued their journey. The surrounding environment became more dangerous after leaving Hejin County. Not only did they have to face man-made harm, but they also had to guard against natural disasters. The distance between each relay station wasn't fixed. Sometimes, it would only take half a day to travel from one relay station to the next, while other times, it would take 3 to 4 days. Fortunately, the carriages were equipped with enough rice and water, so the 50 people in the caravan didn't have to worry too much. The journey was very boring. After 5 or 6 days, even the weak Xueqi gradually got used to the bumpy carriage. Although he was still pale, he was much better than before. In comparison, his ability to adapt was not as good as Takshu, a girl from the inner yard. Under such circumstances, the content of the live stream in the streaming room for the past few days was naturally boring. Having seen the scene of traveling in ancient times with their own eyes, they did not envy Zhang Pengji for being able to travel so majestically and ostentatiously. It was simply suffering. Bing Tang Lemon, I was quite envious, but now I only feel sorry for her. I lived on the grasslands and rode a horse before. I know how tiring it is to ride a horse for a long time. Looking at the road, I can imagine how bumpy it is inside the carriage. In short, modern society is better. Tianxia Wudi, all of you are staring at the streamer and the carriage. Am I the only one who feels sorry for the guard who has to walk? I counted and found that each of them had worn out 7 or 8 pairs of straw sandals. While we were resting, I saw someone sitting on the ground and picking the blisters on his feet. Nide Yida, you've hit the nail on the head. When I first entered the streaming room, I was wondering why every guard had a string of straw sandals hanging on their shoulders. If I didn't know better, I would have thought that they were weaving straw sandals to sell. Now that I understand, I just feel sad. Lao Ciji Lianming, I remember when I was in high school, the school organized an excursion in the 3rd year of high school. The whole grade had to walk up and down the mountain on their feet. It was about 20 kilometers. Many people couldn't recover for a week. Over the past few days, these guards had traveled a lot more than they had traveled on foot. They even had to take turns to keep watch at night. A group of people sleeping in the wilderness. The conditions were really tough. Thinking about himself, as long as he had a card or a mobile phone, he could go on an excursion at any time. But in ancient times, it was almost impossible. The water in the water bag is finished. I don't know if there is a water source nearby. Lucy took a bite of the dry, hard cake. There was no taste in his mouth. The water bag in his hand was empty. The guards sat in twos and threes. They seemed relaxed, but in fact, they were secretly vigilant of their surroundings. I'll ask someone to look for it. Father, go rest in the carriage. Jiang Pengji took the water bag from him and selected a few guards who were in good condition to look for a clean water source. She could choose not to go, but when it came to survival in the wilderness, no one had more experience than she did. She could find water as fast as possible and avoid the dangers lurking in the forest. Her efficiency was unquestionable. Everyone had a few water bags with them. If they drank a little at a time, they could probably last until the next station. Jiang Pengji had a long knife on her waist. The blade was straight and sharp. If it weren't for her delicate face and short stature, she would have looked valiant and heroic. She raised her hand and chopped the bushes around her with a knife, clearing a relatively clear path. There's a stream half a mile ahead, Jiang Pengji said with certainty. It's not winter now. Snakes, insects, rats and ants are active. Before she finished her sentence, she suddenly turned her wrist and held the black knife in a backhand grip. The blade and the sword deeply pierced into the tree trunk behind a guard. The guard was so scared that his body stiffened. His forehead was covered in cold sweat, and he didn't dare to move. Because she had walked a lot, her breathing was a little heavy. It's a poisonous snake. She pulled out the knife with a clang. At that moment, everyone realized that the tip of the knife was stained with blood. A poisonous snake with a triangular head and a brown body was nailed to the tree trunk. It was still in the posture of exerting force before it died. If it weren't for Jiang Pengji's quick action, the snake's poisonous fangs would have bitten the guard's neck. Be careful. Jiang Pengji put away the knife. Her expression was still cold, but it gave people an indescribable sense of security. After stumbling for another half a mile, they heard the sound of flowing water. The troops looked at her with awe and admiration. Go get some water. Hurry up. Jiang Pengji stood on a huge rock by the stream and looked into the distance. She didn't find anything unusual. The guards heard her and immediately took down the water bags hanging on their bodies. They squatted by the water and filled it with water. Sans Hisong Shu Ningshi, the ancient water source is not polluted. It looks really clean. Nong Fu Shan Quan Yudiangshuan, it looks clean, but it doesn't mean it's really clean. If you drink it directly, you might get diarrhea. Who knows how many microorganisms are in it? If you drink it, you might be infected by parasites. I think it's safer to boil it first. Jiang Pengji wouldn't be so careless even if the audience in the streaming room didn't remind her. In fact, every time she fetched water, she would ask someone to boil it in the pot and then put it back into the water bag. Lang Jun. While she was reading the comments to kill time, a guard suddenly ran to her with a bloody coat in his hands. What happened? Jiang Pengji looked at the bloody coat that had been soaked in the water and took it. It was a cloak worn by an adult man. The material was exquisite. It was not the coarse cloth or linen that ordinary people usually used. Where did you find it? There were a few cuts on the cloak, and fresh blood was still burning. In other words, the owner of the cloak had been killed not long ago, and he was nearby. Lang Jun, when we were collecting water, the cloak floated down from upstream. Jiang Pengji looked at the cloak, and her eyes flickered. The atmosphere in the streaming room also fell into a strange silence. They all hoped that Jiang Pengji could go over and take a look. Maybe she could even save a life. But they didn't even need to think to know that the owner of the bloody clothes must have encountered bandits who committed murder and robbery in the deep mountains and forests. Or maybe they were being pursued by their enemies. If Jiang Pengji went there, she might be in danger. Kindness was a good quality, but it was not good to bring danger to strangers or the people around you. That was called St. Mary's disease. Coincidentally, the system's voice rang in Jiang Pengji's ears. It had been pretending to be deaf for a long time. Cheng Cheng, a friend of Meng Zhan from Meng County in Song Prefecture. He is currently in an unknown danger. Please save him in half an hour. Once the mission is completed, the host will receive the reward of full breasts. Raise your wrists high and turn around, and your breasts will cover your clothes. If you fail, you will receive a level 6 electric shock as punishment.
Please consider carefully and carry out the mission as soon as possible to prevent the target from dying. It was another real-time triggered mission. Hee. This time it was a level 6 electric shock. Jiang Pengji was speechless. System, you've been obedient for months. Why did you suddenly appear out of nowhere and cause trouble? What did a human do? Lang Jun, do you want me to go and take a look? The guard asked in a low voice. He was afraid that his voice would attract the attention of the thieves. No need. You go and tell the others to be quiet. Don't let the thieves find out and cause trouble. Jiang Pengji's face was cold. She threw the bloody cloak on the ground without even looking at it. Obviously, people with discerning eyes could tell her decision from her reaction. Yes, I understand. As the saying went, it was better to avoid trouble. There were only a few people who would stand up for injustice. As the guards who were responsible for Longjuan's safety, they didn't want any unnecessary trouble to happen. Some of the viewers in the streaming room were very anxious. They typed and scolded Jiang Pengji for being cold-blooded and heartless. Some of them could understand it rationally, but they were disappointed emotionally. They wanted to see a streamer who was righteous, not selfish and cold-blooded. At that moment, the system's voice came out. The system gritted its teeth. Don't tell me you want to refuse again. Host, if you don't listen to me, you will definitely regret it. Jiang Pengji sneered secretly. I won't do the mission. What can you do to me? The system said, level 6 electric shock punishment. Aren't you afraid of death? Will you let me die? Jiang Pengji asked secretly. The system choked and said angrily, you don't have to refuse the mission just to spite me. You're wrong. I won't save him just because he is Meng Zhan's best friend, Jiang Pengji replied coldly. The system. I quit. This host is too hard to deal with. I know she hates real-time missions, but does she have to go against me like this? About 10 minutes later, the guards had filled all the water bags. Jiang Pengji said to the crowd, let's go. The system kept trying to stop her in her mind. Jiang Pengji, are you really not going to save him? The viewers in the streaming room are throwing rotten eggs at you. As a streamer, you should create a positive image. If you don't save him today, you will lose fans. Shut up. Jiang Pengji spat out coldly. Her expression was very cold. The system was furious, but it couldn't change Jiang Pengji's mind. It could only snort angrily. At that moment, the guards realized that Lang Jun was leading them to another path. Lang Jun, we're going the wrong way. Chapter 253. Jiang Pengji stopped in her tracks and suddenly tilted her head to look at him. She said, the path I say is the one. The guard was dumbfounded. He wondered if his Lang Jun had a bad sense of direction and was too shy to let others know about it. What are you waiting for? Follow me. Jiang Pengji snorted softly and looked askance at him. Her eyes were misty, and she looked strangely proud. Of course, these troops did not understand what it meant to be tsundere, but Jiang Pengji's awkward reaction did touch some people's cuteness. Yes. The guard responded in a loud voice and followed Jiang Pengji's footsteps closely. The audience in the live broadcast room suddenly reacted, and a guess spread in their hearts. Could it be that the host had changed his mind? Nongfu Shanquan Yudiangshuan, streamer, although it's a virtue to stand up for injustice, you should still act within your means. Compared to a complete stranger, I still think that the safety of the host is more important. Even if you don't do anything, you are not in the wrong. Bing Tang Lemon. +1. Streamer, you don't have to change your behavior because of other people's opinions. You only have so few people with you. If you meet a group of bandits, not only will you not be able to save them, but you will also get yourself killed. That's not worth it. There was a cost involved in saving people. Jiang Pengji and her group had only come out to look for water. They did not bring any lethal weapons. There were not many of them and their weapons were not good. If the number of bandits far exceeded Jiang Pengji's, wouldn't it be like sending a lamb into a tiger's den? Yu Yida, Tisk, there are so many people who are being held hostage by morality. If the host didn't save them, it meant that he wasn't kind and benevolent? If she was in danger because she tried to save someone, would you keyboard warriors climb through the screen to save her? Host, you must be careful. The viewers in the live stream were very conflicted, and their stance was not firm.
Jiang Pengji clearly remembered that there was an ID who angrily scolded her for being cold-blooded. However, when she did something that seemed to be an omen of saving someone, the ID followed the crowd and angrily scolded those who were suspected of moral kidnapping, completely forgetting the contents of the bullet screen that he had previously posted. She sneered coldly in her heart. No matter how noisy the bullet screen was, she ignored it. Lao Ciji Lianming. What are you arguing about? Is this the first time you've seen the host's personality of not getting up early without benefits? Compared to those fence-sitters, the truly loyal audience members were more rational and maintained their stance. They might not watch the live stream every day, but they could truly understand Jiang Pengji's character. Is she the kind of person who gets carried away by emotions and acts impulsively? Obviously, she wasn't. Although she didn't know why she changed her mind at the last minute, there was one thing she was sure of. Her reason for saving people had nothing to do with the comments of the audience. If Jiang Pengji was the kind of streamer who could be easily persuaded by the audience, she would not be worth the attention of so many die-hard viewers. According to Lao Ciji Lianming's thoughts, perhaps the reason why she saved him was just because the benefits of saving people were far greater than just standing idly by. Yes, Jiang Pengji was that realistic. You guys keep up, I'll go first. Jiang Pengji nimbly shook off the guards behind her with a few leaps. She stepped on a few boulders beside the waterfall and leaped up. The guards were dumbfounded. Could this be the legendary leaping onto roofs and vaulting over walls? One of them even wanted to imitate Jiang Pengji's movements, but as soon as his right foot stepped on the first boulder, he suddenly slipped and fell forward, causing him to fall hard. There was a tearing sound in his ears, and his clothes were torn. At that moment, the guards found that the boulders beside the waterfall had become wet and slippery because of the splashing water. They couldn't even stand steadily in straw sandals, let alone Jiang Pengji, who was only wearing a pair of wooden clogs. So, how did Lang Jun get up? What are you waiting for? Hurry up and catch up. If anything happens to Lang Jun, you don't want to live anymore. At that moment, a guard's reprimand pulled them back from the shock. All of them used to be bandits, but after days of intense training in Xueqi's tireless brainwashing, they had already curbed their savagery. Not only were they loyal to Jiang Pengji, but they also behaved with a sense of righteousness that only a regular army could have. Their mental outlook was completely new. Jiang Pengji was good at martial arts, so she could easily climb up. They were a little stupid, but they could also find their own way. Mom, you go first. Maybe you can survive by jumping into the pool. Listen to me. Go. There was a pool under the waterfall, and it wasn't very high. Maram was a good swimmer, so she could survive by jumping into the pool. Cheng Cheng panted heavily. As he spoke, his wounds, big and small, were affected, and fresh blood kept gushing out. Because of the excessive blood loss, his lips were pale, and his face was stained with blood. Even in such a mess, it was difficult to hide his beauty. After that, he fumbled to pick up the sharp sword lying beside him, and with the tip of the sword on the ground, he struggled to stand up. If we die together. How can I let my husband face evil people alone? The hair of the woman in green next to Cheng Cheng was messy, and the pearls and jade on her head had long been lost in the escape. She held her husband's hand tightly and said word by word, "If my husband dies here, how can I live?" Cheng Cheng wanted to persuade her again, but he thought that they were in the wilderness. Even if his wife escaped and luckily avoided the murderous bandits, she couldn't survive in the dangerous jungle. He suddenly felt helpless and could only hold her hand tightly. Tenderness suddenly grew in his heart. Okay. Cough, cough, cough. He coughed up blood. With such a wife, what more can I ask for? Cheng Cheng took a deep breath, held her fingers tightly and said reluctantly, "Don't be afraid, ma'am." At that moment, a series of messy footsteps came from afar. Occasionally, it was mixed with angry curses. Cheng Cheng's heart skipped a beat after hearing it. Those powerful bandits had gotten rid of the guards and were chasing after them? Here they are. They escaped pretty fast. More than 40 bandits were all holding shiny knives. Their coarse hemp clothes were stained with blood, but very few of them were really injured. Just kill them. Cut off their heads and take them back. Don't talk so much nonsense. Faintly, some of the bandits' curses were mixed with this kind of dialogue, which made Cheng Cheng feel cold in his heart. When did the bandits become so powerful that they could kill more than 100 of his guards with only 40 to 50 people? What kind of bandits would kill people but not rob them? Instead, they would cut off the heads of others and take them away? This was obviously not a case of bandits killing people and robbing them, but someone deliberately waiting here to kill him. Cheng Cheng's wife was also a heroine with a lot of courage. At this time, she also realized what was going on and looked at her husband with a serious face. Cheng Cheng gritted his teeth and asked sternly, enduring the severe pain of his wound.
Who sent you?
Chapter 254. He was not an important official in the imperial court. He was just a small official in the county. Although he had some background, he hated the internal strife in the imperial court. Instead, he preferred to stay in small places and laze around. He was also careful in his daily life and would not offend anyone. So, who on earth wanted to kill him and paid a hitman to kill him? Ask the king of hell when you go to hell. The leader of the bandits smiled ferociously, and his eyes fell on the lady behind Cheng Cheng with evil intentions. Cheng Cheng's wife was in her early 30s and had 2 sons and a daughter. She knew how to live a good life, took good care of herself, and had a good mentality. Except for her mature and gentle temperament, she was as beautiful as a 16-year-old girl. No wonder these bandits wanted to kill her. Anyway, all they needed to do was cut off Cheng Cheng's head. It didn't matter how they dealt with the others. In order to catch Cheng Cheng, the 2 brothers had been waiting in the wild for many months and hadn't even seen a female mosquito. They couldn't stand it anymore. Cheng Cheng was a man, so he understood the meaning of these people's eyes. His face was cold, and he was so angry that his wound was hurt. Facing dozens of evil eyes, Cheng Cheng's wife made up her mind and grabbed the sword from Cheng Cheng's hand. "Honey, I'm leaving now." After saying that, she was about to cut her throat. At this time, the bandits were also approaching. The situation had reached an irreversible point. Anger and hatred filled his chest. At this moment, all kinds of chaotic thoughts filled Cheng Cheng's mind. The gentle and refined appearance of the past had been completely shattered. If the heavens had eyes and he could escape from death, he would definitely find out who was behind this and tear them to pieces. Clang! Cheng Cheng's wife wanted to cut her throat, but her wrist was hit by a stone. The sharp sword suddenly fell from her hand and stuck into the ground. Tut tut tut. How can a bandit not know the rules? Ha! Cheng Cheng and his wife didn't see it because of the angle, but the bandits clearly saw who was talking. The person jumped up from the waterfall and stopped Cheng Cheng's wife from killing herself. At the same time, he spun around and kicked the bandit closest to Cheng Cheng and his wife in the jaw. Half of the bandit's teeth fell out, his mouth was full of blood, and his jaw was deformed. Although he was still breathing, with that kind of strength, his brain was probably crippled by the kick. Almost in the blink of an eye, that person grabbed another person's hairbun and held a knife in his other hand. The long knife slashed across his neck, causing blood to spurt out. Cheng Cheng and his wife were also so shocked that they didn't come back to their senses. When they calmed down and took a closer look, they found that the young man in the Confucian robe who suddenly appeared was not as tall as their little daughter. Seeing this, their joy was instantly suppressed. "Young friend, these villains are highly skilled in martial arts. There's really no need for you to get involved in this." Before Cheng Cheng could finish his words, he saw that the man didn't even turn his head. He just crooked his finger at the bandits, and his tone was full of contempt. "I'm here to save this woman. You can do whatever you want to the man." Cheng Cheng and his wife were dumbfounded. The excited viewers in the live stream were speechless and sent a few colons. Apart from Jiang Pengji, who else could the person who suddenly appeared be? Her proposal was very friendly, but how could the ferocious bandit agree? Based on the fact that Jiang Pengji had crippled one person and killed another, they would not let her go. The system was also confused by Jiang Pengji's capricious behavior. "Didn't you say that you wouldn't do the mission if you didn't save people?" She didn't play by the rules at all, and the system was a little stunned. Jiang Pengji was surprised. "I think his wife is quite beautiful. It's a pity that she died here. I don't care if the man dies or not, but I want to save the woman. If you think I'm doing a mission, I'll kill the man myself after we deal with these bandits. Then I'll fail the mission." The system. It didn't doubt the possibility that Jiang Pengji would do that. In order to resist the system, its host was also trying her best. "Kill them all." The bandits looked at each other and saw the murderous intent in each other's eyes. "Go!" Jiang Pengji's lips curled into a sneer. The long knife in her hand was still dripping with blood. So soon, there were people who couldn't help but rush up to die. The streaming room had been open for more than half a year, and the audience was already familiar with Jiang Pengji's temperament of killing people easily. At that moment, except for those who were timid and didn't dare to watch, many of the audience felt their blood boiling. After all, it was really helping people when they saw injustice. The hero complex in wuxia novels was always not as good as it was in the TV series. The streamer was the real deal. No matter how good her acting skills were, it couldn't be so real and hot-blooded. Go ahead, but I'll lose if you cross this line. In terms of arrogance, Jiang Pengji was definitely at the level of an ancestor. As soon as he finished speaking, a few bandits rushed over with their swords raised high. Jiang Pengji's eyes flashed slightly when she saw the situation. Her lower body was as steady as a rock, and her body was fast and agile. Although she looked thin and weak, she was no weaker than any man when it came to strength. She dodged and dodged 2 knife attacks aimed at her fatal parts, and at the same time, she took the knife attacks from several people head-on. The bandits thought that they could kill Jiang Pengji with 1 knife attack, but the moment the knife touched her, it was their hands that were split open. The strong men were shocked by the huge force, and they suddenly took 2 steps back. Their lower bodies were momentarily unsteady. It was also in such a short time that everything was difficult to recover. What great strength! That was also the last thought they had left in the world. Jiang Pengji didn't retreat, but moved forward. The blade cut through the void, leaving a beautiful white shadow. At the same time, a cold breeze swept past her neck, and the temperature of her body suddenly receded. Her vision was dim and her eyes were spinning. Yu Yida. Kill. Bing Tang Lemon. Kill again. In Yuejia Zhuge Qinmo, 1 more knife. Ji Kongting. Still not dead. Jiang Pengji. Do you think you're playing a game? Lao Ciji Lianming. Congratulations to the streamer for completing a perfect 5 consecutive kills. After a while, Jiang Pengji had already seen through many problems, but there were still more questions left in her heart. The people in front of her were not bandits at all. Or rather, they were not authentic bandits. Instead, they were fighters carefully trained by others. The couple behind her was the target of their ambush. The man's name was Cheng Cheng. Since he could make friends with Meng Zhan in Song Prefecture's Meng County, he was at least from an aristocratic family. What made her wonder was what was so special about this man that the system was afraid of and even wanted to kill him. Yes, the system had an ulterior motive. Even though they had been together for more than half a year, Jiang Pengji still didn't trust the system at all. Even though it issued a real-time task to save Cheng Cheng, in Jiang Pengji's eyes, its real purpose was to kill Cheng Cheng. Jiang Pengji's resistance to the system was not a day or two, and her hatred for real-time tasks was also deep in her heart. She boldly guessed that the system was persuading her to complete the task, but in fact, it was to provoke her and make her deliberately go against it. To that end, the system even took out the punishment of level 6 electric shock as reward bait. Chapter 255. In the blink of an eye, Jiang Pengji had cleanly taken away a few heads. His decisive and merciless manner even shocked these orthodox assassins. They were no match for Jiang Pengji, and now they had the intention to retreat. Naturally, they were no match for her. 1 hesitation and their heads were separated from their bodies. There were more than a dozen corpses lying at Jiang Pengji's feet. Without exception, all of them were killed with 1 blow. Some died with their throats slit, while others were beheaded with 1 blow. Their heads flew into the sky and blood splattered all over the ground. Some still had some flesh left. Compared to these people's heavy losses, Jiang Pengji was unscathed. Sticky blood kept dripping from the blade. Go! What are you afraid of? Everyone go! One of the bandits roared fiercely, but his companions were not encouraged. Instead, they were even more afraid. They were trying to move forward, but they took a small step back without a trace. Their faces were full of hesitation and fear. These people were almost scared out of their wits by Jiang Pengji. They obviously had an overwhelming advantage in terms of numbers, but no one dared to move forward. Who dared to rush to the front? The people who had rushed to the front were now lying on the ground like corpses. The blood that spurted out was still steaming. The more it was like this, the more afraid they were. The broadswords in their hands could not bring them any sense of security. Seeing this,
Jiang Pengji sneered coldly. Tisk, cowardly rats. If these people could rush forward together and work together to deal with her, she could still look up to them and treat them a little more seriously. After all, no matter how strong she was, it was impossible for her to ignore the overwhelming number of swords that were swarming toward her. However, they revealed their fear of death after only a dozen of their companions were killed. Then, they developed the thought of retreating in fear. Even if such people were armed with advanced laser weapons, they would still be useless. Jiang Pengji could kill them in minutes. They retreated, but Jiang Pengji would not. She suddenly gathered strength under her feet and moved forward quickly. The distance between the two of them was infinitely shortened. In the eyes of these bandits, Jiang Pengji seemed to suddenly leave her original spot and teleport in front of them. Her speed was frightening. Ghost! The word bandit escaped his mouth. However, before the next word left his mouth, a cold sensation flashed across his throat. The heat of his body poured out from this wound, causing his brain to stop working. Everything in front of him faded, becoming black, white, and gray. It was a one-sided massacre. The one who had the upper hand was not the bandits who had a large number of people, but Jiang Pengji, who was covered in blood. Cheng Cheng and his wife were dumbfounded. They had thought that they were going to die, but they didn't expect to come back from the dead at the most desperate time. Mrs. Cheng pursed her lips and supported her injured husband to the side to avoid being dragged into the battle. Cheng Cheng didn't forget what Jiang Pengji had said before. He held his wife's hand tightly, and countless thoughts flashed through his mind. Darling! Cheng Cheng's wife looked up at her husband, asking him silently with her eyes. Don't worry, madam. Just wait a little longer. He gently patted the back of his wife's hand to calm her down. While they were talking, Jiang Pengji killed a few more people. Her clothes had long been stained by blood, and her original color couldn't be seen. She looked like a ferocious ghost who had walked out of hell. The bandits were really scared out of their wits. Their legs were trembling, and they were anxious. However, these people always remembered their mission. Since they couldn't do anything to Jiang Pengji, they could kill Cheng Cheng first. Otherwise, if the news of their mission failure got back, their families would probably die without a burial place. With this idea in mind, the remaining few people joined hands to hold Jiang Pengji back, and the other two went to kill Cheng Cheng and his wife. Darling! Cheng Cheng's wife saw two people rushing out of the chaotic crowd. They raised their knives and intended to cut her husband. She hurriedly stood up and blocked them with her body. Everything happened so fast that it was too fast for her to react. Cheng Cheng saw it, but he was injured all over and could barely stand with his remaining strength. His wife stood in front of him. When he realized what was going on and wanted to push them away, the two knives were already close to him. Cheng Cheng lost his voice in fear. My wife. However, neither he nor Cheng Cheng's wife, who was waiting for the pain with her eyes closed, saw the knives that were supposed to fall didn't come. The knives that were raised high suddenly stopped at the highest point, as if time had stopped. The expressions of the two bandits also froze at the most ferocious and joyful moment. They seemed to have seen the scene of Cheng Cheng and his wife splashing blood on the spot, but it was impossible. As I said, you can do whatever you want. If you cross the line, I lose. Jiang Pengji's knife had already left her hand, and the two bandits who were frozen were killed by the knife that had disappeared. At that moment, except for the audience in the streaming room, no one knew how Jiang Pengji had done it. Although the two bandits were not side by side, they were not in front of each other, either. How could she kill both of them with one knife? Jiang Pengji's back was facing the two bandits, and she was even pinned down by the enemy. How did she do it under such circumstances? The audience was in a life-and-death situation, so they naturally didn't have extra energy to pay attention to it. They couldn't see everything from their current point of view, but the audience in the streaming room could clearly see what had happened at that moment from God's perspective. Lao Siji Lianming. She ran away so fast. I just saw the streamer's sword make a big turn. In Yuejia Zhuge Qinmao. What a beautiful double kill. De Zhuangzhu's wife. I screamed just now. My roommates thought something was wrong with me. It was so exciting. Yu Yi Huang Yi. The streamer's move just now was so cool. I really want to send you 666. Not only did the audience in the streaming room send a series of 666, but the platform was also flooded with all kinds of gifts. If it had encountered such a large number of gifts in normal times,
The system would have come to Jiang Pengji to annoy her, but now it was strangely silent, as if it didn't exist. Others didn't know, but Jiang Pengji knew why the system had such a reaction. Coca-Cola, wait a minute, the streamer doesn't have a weapon now. What should we do? This bullet screen was particularly glaring. Many of the viewers who had sent 666 quivered as they finally noticed this point. In order to save people, Jiang Pengji used a long knife to sneak attack the two bandits. Although she saved Cheng Cheng and his wife from danger, she also put herself in a desperate situation. She was now unarmed, but the bandits around her who were eyeing her were all holding sharp knives.
Chapter 256. He wasn't a reckless or stupid person.
He knew that if he reminded Jiang Pengji to be careful, it would remind the other bandits and boost their confidence. The threat of the bandits was not on the same level as that of a killer with a knife and an unarmed young man. However, even without Cheng Cheng's reminder, the bandits reacted quickly. They were furious at first, then ecstatic.
"Let's go! This guy has no weapon!" one of the bandits shouted. Everyone's eyes lit up with ecstasy. It was a heaven-sent opportunity.
The broadswords in their hands were thirsty for blood. Whether they were weak or not had a weapon in their hands had nothing to do with each other. If Jiang Pengji had a knife, she could at least give them a quick death and they wouldn't feel any pain or torture when they died. But if she didn't have a knife, it would be a torture. The crisp and muffled sounds of bones cracking rose one after another. Even if Cheng Cheng and his wife left the battlefield, they could still hear the sounds clearly.
Not to mention the audience in the streaming room.
The superb streaming equipment gave them the most authentic enjoyment. Every time a bandit's hand, finger, leg or neck was easily broken by Jiang Pengji, they would involuntarily tremble violently, as if the pain had fallen on their bodies, causing them to be startled. Jiang Pengji didn't have a weapon in her hands, but it didn't mean that she had lost her ability to fight. On the contrary, hand-to-hand combat was her strength. As a genetic warrior, how could she not have gone through training in this area? What made people unhappy was that she had practiced the moves hundreds of times in her mind, but her body couldn't keep up with the speed of her thinking. To put it simply, the quality of her body was too poor to satisfy Jiang Pengji. She was not satisfied, but in the eyes of the audience and the people present, her skills were beyond imagination. She was brave and invincible. I really don't know which family this. Cough cough cough. Lang Jun is so young and brave. Cheng Cheng carelessly touched his wound as he spoke. Uncountable pain stimulated his nerves, and his chest was on fire as if it was being licked by a tongue of fire.
Cheng Cheng's wife secretly sighed.
They couldn't even protect themselves now. They didn't know whether the young man was a friend or a foe.
Cheng Cheng seemed to see his wife's worry.
He looked down and shook his head, signaling her not to worry. Even though Jiang Pengji had spoken rudely before, if she really had evil intentions towards them, she wouldn't have needed to risk being besieged by the enemy and throw out the weapon in her hand to save them. She could have allowed the bandits to kill people. Since he had made a move, it proved that the other party had no intention of taking their lives. At this time, there was another noise under the waterfall. Cheng Cheng and his wife looked at each other and saw the seriousness on each other's faces. Following the sound, he saw a few hands clawing at the edge, and after a while, a few more heads popped out. Cheng Cheng quickly gripped the sharp sword in his hand, hesitating whether he should go forward and stab them before they came up. However, what if the people who climbed up weren't bandits but the companions of that young friend? On Cheng Cheng's side, the guards who had climbed up with great difficulty were almost scared out of their wits.
Lang Jun!
The guards who had been struggling to climb up suddenly felt as if they had eaten spinach. They quickly climbed up and pulled out the swords at their waists, trying to help Jiang Pengji out of trouble. However, their Lang Jun was too brave and didn't give them a chance to perform. Bang! Jiang Pengji threw the last body on the ground and stood in the middle of the bodies with a cold face. She looked at the guards quietly. The guards who climbed up awkwardly. For some reason, they felt a little guilty. It was okay to let their Lang Jun take the lead, but as guards, they were not even of any use.
It was a great shame. Go back and train well.
Jiang Pengji stared at the guards for a few seconds, which directly made them feel guilty. None of the guards dared to look at her in the eyes.
They felt guilty. How could they not feel guilty?
It took a group of people so long to climb up a waterfall that wasn't very high. Jiang Pengji couldn't bear that kind of speed. If she really needed their help, the bodies would have been cold, so they needed to redouble their training. The guards all showed a bitter smile, but no one dared to refute Jiang Pengji's order. The guards all put their hands together. Yes. Lang Jun. Jiang Pengji was a little satisfied, and her tone finally softened a little. Clean up these bodies, dig a pit, and burn them. Many of the guards secretly felt their teeth hurt. Their Lang Jun was really ruthless. How was she ruthless? Nowadays, people paid attention to returning to their roots. It was fashionable to bury the dead. If they lost a limb when they were alive, they would be disabled when they went to hell. Not only would they be ashamed to meet their ancestors, but they would also be incomplete after reincarnation. Therefore, a full body burial was very important. But Jiang Pengji's words determined the fate of these people after they died. They couldn't even go to hell after death. So, here was the problem. Was it more miserable to leave their bodies in the wilderness and have them eaten by wild animals, or to die without a full body and be unable to go to hell? The guards dared not refute Jiang Pengji, so they could only silently listen to her orders. After that, Jiang Pengji finally had the time to pay attention to the Chengqing couple. The man was tall and slender. He had a light and gentle temperament. Not to mention his looks, he gave off the impression that he was easy to get along with. He was very approachable. Jiang Pengji analyzed him from head to toe without batting an eyelid. Her eyes darkened slightly. On the other side, Chengqing had a strange feeling in his heart. He had an inexplicable feeling. Jiang Pengji glanced at the woman next to Chengqing and then said to one of the guards, "Do you have medicine with you? Treat this gentleman's wound. It's not a fatal wound, but if it's not treated, it'll be dangerous if he bleeds too much."
Yes.
The guard naturally brought enough medicine with him. "Thank you." Chengqing's wife took the medicine and bowed to Jiang Pengji. Jiang Pengji didn't go over to ask for more information. Instead, she sat on the side, looking gloomy. Others thought she was in a daze, but in fact, Jiang Pengji was just looking at the reward given by the system. System. Congratulations to the streamer for completing the real-time task. Saving Chengqing. You have received the reward, full breasts, white wrist high, body smooth, sexy shroud. Please receive the reward at the receiving desk. System. Are you not happy? She asked the system in her heart. The system sent her a series of ellipses. This time, I have completed the task you gave me perfectly. Jiang Pengji smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. The system replied, the host finally understands my painstaking efforts. I am very happy. However, after the reply, the system became silent again. It wasn't as noisy as it usually was. Obviously, it wasn't as happy as she expected. Jiang Pengji could even imagine it gritting its teeth in anger. Chapter 257. Why was she angry? Maybe it was because Jiang Pengji didn't act according to the system's plan. It would be weird if she felt good. She couldn't help but laugh to herself. Her vigilance and defense against the system, which was not low in the first place, increased by another level. My instructor once told me that when you meet your enemy, the moment they want to kill you is the moment their weakness is the most obvious. Killing intent is also a kind of subjective emotion, and it often involuntarily reveals the most important motive. Jiang Pengji suddenly opened her mouth. The system couldn't stand it anymore. It sounded a little angry. Host, what did you mean by that? What I mean is to tell you, if you want to scheme against me in the future, you better keep your foxtail. She said bluntly. The system was speechless. It was like it was constipated. It couldn't say a word. In fact, before Jiang Pengji opened her mouth, it didn't know how it had exposed its real purpose. There was nothing wrong with the triggered mission, but it still persuaded Jiang Pengji to carry out the mission. The reward, full breasts, was also something she couldn't complain about. As for the punishment, the system paid a lot of money. As long as she refused the mission, Jiang Pengji would be the winner in life. But she didn't play by the rules. The system didn't know where it was wrong until just now. It was calculating in its mind, but it forgot how smart its host was. It was only the description of the real-time triggered mission that made the host suspicious. Cheng Cheng, a friend of Meng Zhan from Meng County in Song Prefecture. He is in an unknown danger. Please save him in half an hour. The mission description didn't seem to be wrong, but it was a trap. Who was Cheng Cheng? It described him as a friend of Meng Zhan from Meng County in Song Prefecture. The title didn't seem to be wrong, but Jiang Pengji was suspicious because of it. Those who could be friends with Meng Zhan were at least from a noble family. They might even be an official. Therefore, under normal circumstances, the description should be some family or some official. But the description given by the system was, a friend of Meng Zhan from Meng County in Song Prefecture. Who was Cheng Cheng to Meng Zhan? Why did the system put him in front of himself? He thought about the grudge between Jiang Pengji and Meng Zhan. Under normal circumstances, she would be lucky if she didn't leave after reading the mission description. If she failed the mission, she would be punished with a level 6 electric shock. Her force fusion would increase by at least a dozen points. There were only benefits to rejecting the mission, and it was in line with Jiang Pengji's usual style. The second suspicious point was that the quest was only announced after blood robes appeared. According to Jiang Pengji's usual temperament, it was highly likely that she would help when she saw injustice. She was not afraid at all, but the system just had to issue a mission at this time. The mission content seemed to be to save people according to her wishes, but the effect was to dispel her thoughts. In that case, how could Jiang Pengji not be suspicious? The system, who understood everything, wanted to explode on the spot. This game can still be played? Its stomach was cramping and its head was hurting. It needed to calm down. After a long time, it consoled Jiang Pengji stiffly, even though it was useless. As the other half of the host, I can't possibly harm you. As for scheming against you, that's even more impossible. Jiang Pengji smiled and asked, System, when you said that, didn't you feel like you were lying? The system still wanted to explain, but she forcefully interrupted it and made it swallow its words. Forget it. I never wanted you to be loyal to me. No matter what your purpose is, it has nothing to do with me. However, I hope you can understand one thing. I, Jiang Pengji, am not someone that anyone can order around. I am not a tool that anyone can use to kill others. Even if it's you, the system. She clicked her tongue and did not hide her arrogance. She and the system had already shed all pretense of cordiality. It did not matter. The system sent a long string of ellipses. After spending half a year together, it more or less understood Jiang Pengji. Unnecessary explanations would only make her more disgusted and vigilant. So what if Jiang Pengji hated it? The relationship between the host and the system was simply that of a parasite and a parasite. Unless it left voluntarily, the other party could not do anything to it. Anyway, she had completed the mission. It had achieved half of its purpose. The system secretly held its breath and could only comfort itself. After this lesson, it would be fine to be more careful in the future. No matter how smart Jiang Pengji was, it was impossible for her to be flawless. One could only be a thief for 1,000 days. How could one guard against a thief for 1,000 days? Jiang Pengji said that being mentally retarded was a disease that could not be cured, just like the system. Her plan failed this time, but it still wanted to succeed next time? After the confrontation was over and the system dared not show itself, Jiang Pengji finally had the leisure to find out more about Cheng Cheng's background. He was the first person who was seen as a thorn in the system's side and wanted to use her to watch Cheng Cheng die. Coincidentally, Cheng Cheng had already treated his wound with the help of his wife. He tied a clean gauze and barely stopped the bleeding. With the help of Cheng Cheng's wife, he walked to Jiang Pengji with weak steps and bowed deeply. I am Cheng Cheng, from the Cheng family of Langi. Thank you for your help that my wife and I were able to successfully escape from this disaster. Cheng Cheng's face was still pale, but he slightly cleaned up his disheveled appearance. It was hard to hide his elegance. Jiang Pengji hurriedly returned the greeting. Hearing his background, she could not help but ask, the Cheng family of Langi? Those with the surname Cheng in Langi had inextricably linked blood relations with the gentry of the Cheng family. Looking at the material of Cheng Cheng's clothes and his wife's attire, both of their families were quite well off. Yes, Cheng Cheng said. Jiang Pengji asked, Sir, you are from a noble family. Why didn't you bring any guards when you went out? Instead, you were targeted by those vicious people and provoked a vendetta? Cheng Cheng looked doubtful. Not to mention Jiang Pengji. Even he did not know how he had provoked such a group of people. If it is not convenient for you, I will not ask more. Cheng Cheng hurriedly said, It is not like that. It is just that. Even I have no clue about this matter. I think I have always been kind to people. Although I do not have many close friends, I have never been angry with others. I really do not know how I provoked others to kill me. This time when I went out with my wife, I knew that the outside world was turbulent, so I brought enough guards with me, but they all died in the hands of those vicious people. If it were not for Jiang Pengji's coincidental arrival, Cheng Cheng and his wife would have died long ago. He was not afraid of death, but he did not like to die without knowing why. Chapter 258. Cheng Cheng couldn't figure it out, but Jiang Pengji's words gave him a new suspect. Noticing the change in Cheng Cheng's expression, Jiang Pengji asked casually, "Do you have someone in mind?" Cheng Cheng couldn't say it out loud even if it was really that person, let alone just having a slight suspicion. Jiang Pengji didn't ask further. She glanced at Cheng Cheng's wife. The couple had been living a comfortable life. They had never been as embarrassed as they were that day. She asked a very practical question. "I just heard from you that all the guards were killed by the villains. Now we're in the middle of nowhere, and we're still a few days away from the nearest courier station. What's your plan?" Cheng Cheng was injured, and his wife didn't do any housework. They didn't know how to survive in the wild. Cheng Cheng looked embarrassed when Jiang Pengji asked the question. Before he could say anything, Jiang Pengji continued, "If you don't mind and trust me, why don't I send you to the nearest station? You can settle down there and then contact your families. You are still in danger if you don't know the background of the thugs." Cheng Cheng thanked Jiang Pengji for her kindness with shame. If they didn't get a ride, they would have a hard time surviving even if the thugs didn't kill them. Compared to Cheng Cheng's gentleness, his wife was very straightforward. She liked Jiang Pengji more after witnessing what she did. "You have extraordinary skills and an imposing aura. I wonder which family you are from?" "The Lu family of Hejian. My first name is Shi. My father is Lu Shi. If you don't mind, you can call me Lanting." After hearing this, Cheng Cheng and his wife were both surprised, but they focused on different things. Cheng Cheng's wife focused on the young man who was talented enough to be a good son-in-law. "You are Lu Zhongqing's son?" When Lu Shi was young, he was the man that many girls missed. The story of him and his wife, Gu Min, was even more popular. Cheng Cheng's wife had never seen him, but she had heard about him. She didn't expect a talented man like Lu Shi to have such a powerful son. Those villains had forced the couple into a dead end, but in front of this young man, they were so vulnerable. After a while, Mrs. Cheng's mind was already twisted. She labeled Jiang Pengji as the future son-in-law. If any family's daughter could marry Lu Shi's son, it would be a great deal. It was a pity that his daughter was still young. Otherwise, he would really want to settle down for her. Cheng Cheng's focus had nothing to do with Lu Shi. It was purely because of Lu Shi. "You're already 20? He didn't look like he was 12 or 13 at most." Jiang Pengji was stunned for a moment. She immediately understood the reason behind Cheng Cheng's question. She explained, "The courtesy name of Lanting was left behind by my late mother. It's just that father and mother loved each other deeply. After mother passed away, she always called me Lanting. Since he had already given it, he might as well just use it. It would save him the trouble of giving it a nickname." Cheng Cheng. Such a wild and unrestrained style was really something that Lu Shi would do. Most of the blood on her body had dried up. It was impossible to tell what she looked like. Jiang Pengji told the guards to protect Cheng Cheng and his wife. She found a secluded place to wash her face. She couldn't wash off the other blood on her body, but she had to wash off the blood on her face. "You're really good-looking. Do you have an uncommitted marriage?" Cheng Cheng's wife was more and more satisfied with Jiang Pengji. She saw that Jiang Pengji looked so delicate and pretty. Although she was a little feminine, she was a popular image of a handsome young man. She was tempted and wanted to be a matchmaker for Jiang Pengji. Jiang Pengji nodded and then shook her head. She said, "I did have an engagement, but Master Liaochen told my fortune. He said that I shouldn't get married early. Otherwise, it would be harmful. So, I had to cancel the engagement in order not to waste the girl's time." Cheng Cheng's wife gave up on the idea of being a matchmaker. She felt it was a pity. She didn't doubt the truth of Jiang Pengji's words. Marriages between gentry families were not child's play. Unless it was unavoidable, they wouldn't cancel the engagement. Jiang Pengji's reason was irrefutable. Cheng Cheng looked at Jiang Pengji's face thoughtfully until his wife pinched him. Her husband was a good teacher. She didn't want to spoil Jiang Pengji's mood by talking nonsense. Cheng Cheng smiled bitterly. You've misunderstood me. I just think that you look familiar. I think I've seen you somewhere before. Since Lanting is Lu Zhongqing's son, he naturally looks like him. Why are you thinking about this? Cheng Cheng was speechless. He had never really met Lu Shi. They had been friends for a long time. They both knew of Lu Shi, but they had never met. The circle of gentry families was not big, but it was not small either. He had never met Lu Shi, but he had made friends with the same people. He had heard about Lu Shi from his friends. Therefore, Cheng Cheng said that Lu Shi looked familiar was not because of Lu Shi. He thought about it and suddenly remembered that he had seen an unfinished painting from his friend a few months ago. If the woman in the painting was a few years younger, more youthful, and softer, wouldn't that be Lu Shi? However, Lu Shi was Lu Shi's second legitimate son. He was the daughter of a concubine in the Lu family and had been raised in a boudoir. Could it be that the woman sleeping among the flowers in his friend's painting was the late Gu Min? It was terrifying to think about it. However, it was not impossible to think about it this way. His friend was Yuan Jing's disciple, and Yuan Jing had some contact with Gu Min when he was young. Perhaps he knew about Gu Min's appearance through Yuan Jing. Are you in trouble, master? Jiang Pengji opened the way with her knife and walked in front. The shrubs were cleared more thoroughly than before. It was more convenient for Cheng Cheng and his wife to walk. I see that you look troubled. Cheng Cheng was speechless. He felt that it was better not to tell the young man in front of him that there was a boy who was not much older than him who painted his mother. It's nothing. I'm just thinking about who wants me dead. Cheng Cheng found a reasonable excuse. Although I have some guesses, I don't think that person would do such a thing. So that was what he was worried about. Jiang Pengji was not suspicious. Even though she could see that Cheng Cheng was a little guilty, it was not appropriate for her to ask. Lang Jun, you're finally back. The guards found traces of a fight nearby. Xueqi saw a few people walking out of the forest from afar. From afar, Xueqi saw a few figures walking out of the forest. He hurriedly trotted forward and swallowed all the words he wanted to say. Who could tell him that Lang Jun had only gone out to fetch water? Although it took a long time. How could he be covered in blood when he came back? Chapter 259. Xueqi was confused, but Jiang Pengji was much calmer. What kind of fight? She threw a few water bags to Xueqi and said, ask the guards to gather some firewood and boil it in a pot. Put it back in the water bags when it's cold. The water in the stream is not clean after all. Boil it before drinking. He hurriedly took the water bags and found 2 new faces in Jiang Pengji's team. Xueqi said, the guards who were looking for firewood reported that they found several carriages and horses without people on the road ahead. There were many corpses lying around. After checking, they found that there was a fierce fight not long ago. The master is worried that it was done by the mountain bandits. Xueqi had been to that place. After careful inspection, he found that the possibility of the bandits committing the crime was very low. It was more like a premeditated murder. Therefore he could not help but worry about his Lang Jun, who had gone out to fetch water. He was about to lead some people to search for her, but Jiang Pengji came back with blood all over her body. If it were not for the fact that it was broad daylight, Xueqi would have thought that it was the ghost of his Lang Jun's death. His heart almost stopped beating. He was scared to death. Jiang Pengji immediately understood and said, those should be Mr. Cheng's carriages. They were attacked by bandits on the road. I happened to pass by and help them beat the bandits back. Xiaoyu, ask someone to prepare some food. She said it lightly as if she did not remember that they were surrounded by 40 or 50 bandits. Of course, Xueqi was misled into thinking that those were just ordinary mountain bandits. He did not think too much about it. His Longjuan's face was ruddy, her eyes were still clear, and she was full of energy. He could tell that she was fine at first glance. Well, it was probably those bandits who got into trouble. With that conclusion, Xueqi did not panic at all. Yes, I'll do it now. Xueqi was completely familiar with the housekeeper mode. He did whatever Jiang Pengji said. Oh, and ask Takshu to bring me some clean clothes. I need to find a place to wash up. It's uncomfortable to have blood on my body.
The viewers in the streaming room were instantly excited. Outdoor bathing play. According to the routine, there must be a fool who accidentally passed by, saw her, and then accidentally met the streamer. Just thinking about it made him feel sweet. Haha, sweet? If Zhang Pengji didn't even have this little bit of vigilance, she would have died a few times. Takshu heard the news and ran over. She was relieved to see that Zhang Pengji was fine, apart from looking a little disheveled. Please wait for a moment. Lang Jun. I will go prepare the clothes. After she finished speaking, Takshu retreated. She went to the carriage's trunk to find a set of clean clothes, a towel, and soap. County Chief Lu is here. Chung Chung saw that Zhang Pengji was done with her work and asked. Yes, I heard that my father is this year's General Evaluation Officer and needs to go to Shangjing to take charge. Ching Cheng. Is there anything wrong? He felt that Chung Cheng's expression was slightly speechless. Chung Chung continued to be silent, with a complicated expression. After a long time he said with a wry smile, people used to say that Lu Zhongqing was wild and unruly. I used to think that it was someone else who wanted to discredit County Chief Lu. But now it seems that he was right. The evaluation was imminent, but the chief examiner was only on his way now. Lu Shi. As soon as he arrived, he heard someone bad-mouthing his daughter and damaging his image as a father. Who did he offend? He was an old fox in the officialdom, so he did not take Chung Cheng's words to heart. Lanting, these two are... Lu Shi walked over and saw the face of the person who had bad-mouthed him. Just one glance and the unhappiness in his heart disappeared. Although Chung Cheng and his wife looked disheveled, they still looked elegant. No matter who saw them, they would sincerely praise them. Father. She told her father what had happened in detail and said, it was fate that brought us together, so I invited Mr. and Mrs. Cheng to come and we plan to go to the next station together. After all, the murderer's purpose and background are still unknown. If we leave them in the wilderness, I am afraid that their lives will be in danger. Father, what do you think? As Zhang Pengji spoke, she found that Lu Shi's eyes were a little blank. She could not help but frown. It seemed that the couple behind her had some background. Otherwise, why would Lu Shi have such an expression? In fact, Chung Cheng and his wife did have some background, but not yet. Lu Shi was a man who had been through a lot. He had met Feng Jin, Su Ku, and Qiguan Rang. Cheng Cheng was no exception. Oh, it's Chung Wenfu. Nice to meet you. Lu Shi knew Cheng Cheng and called him by his name. Cheng Cheng's face became serious. They were talking to each other, but their eyes were looking at each other. Before this they had never met each other, but through a few mutual friends, they more or less had some understanding of each other. Now that they saw each other in person, they naturally couldn't wait to size each other up and see if they were really as outstanding as others said. Cheng Cheng was thinking about this, but Lu Shi had other considerations. Because of his daughter and wife, Lu Shi knew some secrets that were not known to others, and one of them was Cheng Cheng. Today, Cheng Cheng was just an unknown county official, living a leisurely life with his wife. Not to mention the outside world, even in the Cheng family, Cheng Cheng did not have much of a presence. He was low-key and humble, so he was not well known. Except for a small number of friends who knew his background, outsiders thought that Cheng Cheng was just an idle person with no ambition. That was what Lu Shi knew, and the other part was from his wife. Cheng Cheng was the first historian who presided over the compilation of the history of the 16 kingdoms, the Xia dynasty, and the Zhang dynasty for the first 60 years. He spent 35 years restoring countless cultural relics and ancient books. He created a new chapter in the history books. He became the imperial censor and was posthumously awarded the title after his death. More importantly, according to Amin's rather resentful description, this capable person, with the support of Zhang dynasty's first ancestor, Emperor Chen, Zhang Pengji, took the lead in formulating a relatively complete examination system for selecting students. She determined many compulsory subjects for students. Lu Shi did not know why his wife was so resentful, but he thought about it when he was young and hated studying. He hated this kind of teacher who would press his head down and force him to recite. Despite her resentment, Gu Min had a very high opinion of this historian. Although Zhang dynasty's founding emperor was the first emperor, she had a bad reputation because of her status as a woman and her ruthless methods when fighting for the throne. Only Cheng Cheng insisted on upholding the integrity of a historian. Black is black, white is white.
His description of Emperor Chen was detailed and objective, and he never hid his praise. He even wrote a book to refute other groundless slander.
Chapter 260.
According to his wife, Cheng Cheng was not good with words, but his writing was sharp and he was good at scolding people.
Lu Shi thought about it.
The scene of Cheng Cheng holding a book in one hand and a pen in the other appeared in his mind. The scene was so beautiful that he didn't dare to think about it. He was afraid that he would laugh in front of Cheng Cheng.
Lu Shi entertained Cheng Cheng and his wife.
He asked people to prepare food and hot water for them. Although the conditions were simple, they were considerate. Jiang Pengji took the guards to bury the bodies of the guards. After all, they died protecting Cheng Cheng and his wife. When they came back, they brought back a lot of carriages. She couldn't help but be curious when she saw the marks of the wheels in the ground. Cheng Cheng's life was no longer in danger. He was overjoyed when he saw that Jiang Pengji sent the carriages back. Regardless of the others, he went straight into the carriage and opened the boxes one after another. He was relieved to see that the treasures were safe.
Cheng Cheng's wife smiled and joked, "It's time for you to change your temper. Otherwise, Lu County Chief and Lanting will laugh at you. No one will pick up these boxes if you throw them on the road, but you treat them as your lifeblood. People who don't know better will think that they are treasures." Cheng Cheng was a little embarrassed. He blushed because of his wife's teasing. After all, it was a little crazy to bring a few carriages of bamboo slips with him. Lu Shi helped Cheng Cheng out of the predicament. He knew how difficult it was to study nowadays. The bamboo slips in the carriages were not as important as one tael of gold for ordinary people. They were just a pile of bamboo slips for starting a fire. But for those who had foresight, they were priceless. It was hard to find one of them even with money. Cheng Cheng secretly smiled at his wife. There was a hint of pride on his face, which made people who saw him smile. Because Cheng Cheng was injured, he could not withstand any additional torment. In addition, the condition of the road was not smooth. So Lu Shi made the decision to prepare a carriage for the couple. The shock absorption system of the Lu's carriage belonged to the pyramid in this era. Cheng Cheng and his wife didn't know the reason at first. They didn't know Lu Shi's kindness until they got in the carriage. Privately, Cheng Cheng's wife changed the dressing on her husband's wound. She inadvertently talked about the bandits during the day. "Did you think of someone, my husband?" Cheng Cheng's face was gloomy, and he said with disappointment, "Alas, if I had to say who I offended today, it could only be that person. That person." Madame Cheng's eyes darted around as if trying to guess who that person was. "Meng Zhan from Cangzhou." Cheng Cheng said hesitantly, "But I don't think Meng Zhan lives up to his name, but I don't think he's that vicious. He just heard some scandals. Why would he want to kill me?" If Meng Zhan really wanted to kill him because of the scandal of exchanging a concubine for a legitimate wife, he wouldn't have left Cangzhou. Why would he wait a few months before settling the score? Some scandals? What scandal is it? Mrs. Cheng was confused. My husband is not a talkative person. Looking at the wounds on her husband's body, how could she not feel distressed? If she knew who was behind this, she would definitely not let them off easily. Didn't Meng Zhan lose his second son a while ago? On the surface, it is said that he is the son of his first wife, but in reality, he might be the son of a concubine. Cheng Cheng did not hide anything from his wife. If it weren't for what happened today, he wouldn't have told anyone about it. Gossiping about other people's affairs was not what a gentleman would do. Mrs. Cheng was surprised. She didn't expect it to be like this. In today's era, there was a clear distinction between the legitimate wife and the concubine. Messing up the legitimate wife and the concubine could be said to be a minor offense, or even a minor offense could be said to have violated the law. The whole family would be despised and would never be able to lift their heads again. For a noble family like the Mengs, the higher the status, the more attention they would receive. Naturally, the consequences would be more serious if the scandal was exposed. It seemed that it was not impossible for Meng Zhan to hire a killer. However, Mrs. Cheng had the same opinion as Cheng Cheng. She thought the possibility of Meng Zhan being the killer was very low. Think about it. Maybe it was someone else. Cheng Cheng let out a long sigh. He racked his brains but still couldn't figure it out. He had to put it aside for now. They had planned to separate at the nearest station, but Cheng Cheng and Lu Shi had a similar temperament. They chatted happily.
Under Lu Shi's enthusiastic invitation, the two families decided to go on the road together. It was a win-win situation, and it also saved Cheng Cheng and his wife some embarrassment. If they sent a letter to their family at the station, it would take at least a month for the family to send someone over. Lanting, are you interested in these books? Although they were on the road and the conditions were simple, Cheng Cheng's injury had been healed after a period of rest. The 6 Arts of a Gentleman was a compulsory course for scholars. Cheng Cheng naturally knew how to ride and shoot. After his injury was healed, he didn't want to stay in the carriage anymore, so he decided to ride a horse to get some fresh air. He found Jiang Pengji was staring at his bookcase, so he couldn't help but ask. Yes, I found that Uncle Cheng has more books than my father's study. In that era, the books were basically in the hands of the noble families. The richer the family was, the more books they had. According to her understanding, Cheng Cheng was not a direct descendant of the Cheng family, but the tens of thousands of books in the carriage all belonged to him. She couldn't help but gasp in admiration. She didn't know where Cheng Cheng had gotten so many books. If possible, Jiang Pengji would like to make a copy. Books were an important way to pass on human wisdom. They were indispensable if civilization wanted to move forward. Of course, if they wanted to break the monopoly of civilization by the noble families, they were more than enough. Cheng Cheng didn't know what Jiang Pengji was thinking. He couldn't help but feel proud when he heard what she said. He wasn't bragging. Even the noble families with thousands of years of history might not have some of the books in the box. A small portion of these books are from my family's collection, and the rest are the remnant pages of ancient books that I've collected. Occasionally, when I hear that some houses have rare ancient books, I'll shamelessly visit them. At this point, Cheng Cheng's words became a little more vague. From this, it could be seen that the shamelessly visit he mentioned might be the kind that came uninvited. Over time, I've accumulated so many. Cheng Cheng's wife often complained about her husband. She said that she was not the legal wife, but a concubine. The books in the box were Cheng Cheng's legal wife. Although it was a joke, it showed how much Cheng Cheng liked the books. Chapter 261. Jiang Pengji wasn't a good student who loved to study, but she respected and feared the professionals who worked in the field of education. Since ancient times, human history had experienced ups and downs, but no matter how tragic the war was, they were always able to rebuild civilization from the ruins at the fastest speed possible. The reason for this was that apart from the strong resilience of humans to survive, another reason was the protection of civilization. As long as the seed of civilization was still there, it would eventually bloom on the ruins. Jiang Pengji naturally respected and yearned for Cheng Cheng's ambition. Civilization was never exclusive to one family or one clan. It was the unique wealth of the human race. Cheng Cheng didn't think too deeply or too far, but he didn't stick to one pattern. His eyes didn't only see the present, but he also thought about the inheritance of civilization. That alone made him much better than most of the aristocratic families who cherished their treasures. Jiang Pengji thought about it and asked with a smile, "Uncle Cheng, would you be willing to lend me a few books to copy?" The aristocratic families treated books as their lifeblood. Unless they had a good relationship, they wouldn't lend them easily, let alone let others copy them. Cheng Cheng was very generous, but he was also a little childish, so he replied with a smile. "Of course you can, but you have to give me something in exchange." Cheng Cheng stroked his neatly trimmed beard and said, "Bamboo slips are easy to get wet, bulky, and not easy to preserve. Every time I find some slips eaten by insects, it hurts my heart so much. I heard that paper in Hejian County is hard to buy. If it's written on bamboo paper, it's light and easy to preserve. I heard that the workshop is your mother's dowry?" Cheng Cheng's wife, who was sitting in the carriage, was so angry that she almost broke her teeth when she heard her husband's nonsense. "Lanting, don't listen to his nonsense. Those treasures of his are not worth much money." Cheng Cheng's wife revealed her husband's secret and said in an angry tone, "If you like any of them, just tell me. You don't have to listen to me." Cheng Cheng's face turned red and he secretly wanted to beg his wife for mercy. At least she would give him some face in front of the younger generation. Jiang Pengji couldn't help but laugh when she saw their interaction. "The workshop is indeed my mother's dowry. It produces a limited amount of paper every year, and most of them are ordered to other families. If Uncle Cheng likes it, this nephew will ask the housekeeper to save a few knives for you and send them to your mansion." Hearing her words, Chung Cheng's expression couldn't help but turn solemn as he hurriedly explained. Lanting, this is a misunderstanding. No matter how frivolous I am, I still have to maintain my dignity. How could I take advantage of a junior? Uncle's original intention was that if you took these books back and copied them, you could also make a copy for Uncle. The cost of paper and ink would be calculated according to the market price. There are more and more books, and Uncle is getting older and older. I don't know how long he can take care of them. Not to mention that bamboo slips were heavy, they were also very difficult to preserve. They had very high requirements for the environment in which they were stored. Otherwise, they would go moldy or be eaten by insects. Among these tens of thousands of bamboo slips, almost every one of them had been rebound. The reason was that they were damp and moldy, and the writing was illegible. When copying, it was inevitable to make mistakes or missing words. In order to ensure that the content of the book was good, he had to go back and forth several times, and then let his sons help him proofread it. After confirming that there were no mistakes, he would recompile it. The project was very time-consuming. Ever since the introduction of bamboo paper, he had thought of replacing the bamboo slips with paper. However, the scale of the paper-making workshop was slow to expand. The paper produced every year was almost monopolized by a few gentry families, so he couldn't order any. That was a pain in the ass. Jiang Pengji rolled her eyes and replied with a smile, I can't show you my handwriting. I can look at it myself, but if I show it to Uncle, won't I be displaying my slight skill in front of an expert? How about this? I will provide the ink, paper, and inkstone, and Uncle will make an extra copy for me. The ink, paper, and inkstone will be provided free of charge. Just treat it as a gift for Uncle. Cheng Cheng was speechless. He almost couldn't wrap his head around what she was saying. Before Jiang Pengji could finish her words, a sachet flew toward her head. She raised her hand and grabbed it to avoid being hit. How dare you? Uncle Cheng is such a person. How can he make such a joke? Lu Shi's face was cold. He was the one who threw the sachet. Cheng Cheng quickly stopped and teased Lu Shi. Zhongqing, why are you angry? Are you angry that your son made a bad deal? Even though Cheng Cheng didn't care much about business, he knew how expensive the bamboo paper in Hejin County was. In order to finish copying those tens of thousands of bamboo slips, the amount of bamboo paper needed was not a small amount. Of course, many of the bamboo slips were unique copies, so their value was not low. Lu Shi said, Wan Fu, you misunderstood me. Bamboo paper is expensive outside, but it doesn't cost a lot to use it. This kid is stupid today. He wants to exchange some paper for Wan Fu's book collection. I've never seen or heard of such a black-hearted businessman. Cheng Cheng laughed and said to Jiang Pengji, like father, like son. You have the style of your father. Lu Shi was speechless. He believed that Cheng Cheng was good at scolding people. He had just called Jiang Pengji a black-hearted profiteer, and Cheng Cheng had turned around and mocked him. Wait, who is the father and daughter here? Seeing that Cheng Cheng and his daughter were on the same side, Lu Shi suddenly felt that he was in a bad situation. He was so tired. Cheng Cheng agreed readily to Jiang Pengji's half-joking words. Okay, nephew. As long as you give me enough bamboo paper, I'll send you a copy when I'm done. It's worth it. Jiang Pengji blushed and felt a little embarrassed. Bamboo paper was extremely expensive to outsiders, but her family knew that it was worthless. Using such a small amount of paper to exchange for tens of thousands of precious books, this business could not be more profitable. Even Jiang Pengji felt that she was somewhat shameless. But Cheng Cheng accepted it so generously, without the slightest hint of displeasure, which made her feel a lot of emotions. In fact, Cheng Cheng also felt a little embarrassed. He felt that he had taken advantage of the younger generation. He was not a selfish person. He treasured the books very much, but if someone wanted to borrow them and copy them, he would gladly agree. With just one more copy, they would be able to exchange for countless precious bamboo papers. In the future, they wouldn't have to worry about the preservation of their books. Thus, they would be able to solve their worries. It seemed that both sides had suffered a loss, but in fact, from another perspective, they had both benefited. In other words, the value of some things couldn't be measured by gold or silver. Thank you, Uncle. I'll cherish it. Chapter 262. After sitting in the carriage for so long, It was rare for Lu Shi to come out and relax his stiff and sore limbs. Otherwise, his muscles would protest. In another half a day's journey, we will be able to enter the city. I haven't been here for a few years, but Shangjing is still bustling. The outside world was about to turn upside down, but the majestic Shangjing was still singing and dancing, which made Lu Shi, who was used to desolation, very uncomfortable. The imperial family of Dongqing had no other skills, but they were good at seeking pleasure and pretending to be peaceful. With such a weak and incompetent imperial family, it was no wonder that the Shangyang Palace could not be protected and was burned to the ground. Lu Shi's head hurt when he thought of the mastermind who burned down Shangyang Palace and massacred the imperial family. The mastermind was none other than Qiguan Rang, Prince Shouchong's advisor. Yes, he heard it right. It was that Qiguan Rang. A counselor of low birth, a treacherous character, ruthless methods, and a counselor whose loyalty had all been fed to dogs. Gu Min didn't know much about history. Most of what she knew was from TV dramas, so she only remembered 3 things about Qiguan Rang. First, he burned down Shangyang Palace and killed the men of Dongqing's imperial family. Second, he caused the empress to lose 3 cities in a row. Third, he set up a trap in the prison and caused the former master's good situation to collapse instantly. He lost everything and surrendered to the empress on the day the city opened. When everyone was pleading for mercy for their former master, hoping that the empress would spare the life of the former master, Prince Chongshou, and just imprison him. This would also show off her benevolence. The empress asked for Qiguan Rang's opinion, but he actually insisted on beheading him and eliminating the root of the problem. He even said a very famous sentence: "A good bird chooses a tree to nest in, and a virtuous minister chooses a master to serve. Since he betrayed me, why should I care about him?" Listening to him, it was as if he had been cheated on by Prince Chongshou. Others would at most whine when they were cheated on, but Qiguan Rang directly killed the old master's family. Although he didn't know why Qiguan Rang knew his daughter early, it was still a good thing. Without the help of Qiguan Rang, the timid and hesitant Prince Chongshou wouldn't be able to do anything. When the sun was high in the sky, they finally saw the towering city wall. Lu Shi was lost in his thoughts. Cheng Cheng, who was riding parallel to him, used his hands to cover his eyes. Suddenly, he let out a sound of surprise and smiled faintly. "Did you see someone familiar?" Lu Shi followed Cheng Cheng's line of sight. In the distance, there was a luxurious carriage with a thin gauze draped over it. A blurry figure was sitting inside. Around the carriage stood hundreds of armored guards with long spears in their hands. In addition, there were a few young men dressed in Confucian robes with their hair crowns hanging high above their heads. Looking at the bows and quiver on the backs of the horses, it was not difficult to guess what these people were going to do next. It was likely that the noble sons of Shangjing were taking them to participate in the hunt, taking the opportunity to exchange feelings. With the assessment around the corner, this kind of activity was always particularly frequent. They seemed to be going on an outing to participate in some kind of gathering. Should Wen Fu go and say hello? Cheng Cheng thought for a moment, then shook his head. There's no hurry. Let's go into the city first. Considering the situation in Shangjing, Lu Shi asked the motorcade to move to the side to avoid colliding with people and causing unnecessary trouble. However, just because they didn't take the initiative to look for trouble didn't mean that trouble wouldn't come looking for them. Jiang Pengji started her live stream early that day. The audience in the live stream room received the news early in the morning and rushed over quickly. The room was full in an instant. Shangjing was a real ancient capital city. The degree of prosperity and extravagance wasn't something that a small rural place like Hejian County could compare with. Jiang Pengji rode on white leisurely. It looked like she was looking at the scenery, but in fact, she was chatting with the audience. Bing Tang Liming, #propping chin. As soon as I saw the road paved with bricks, I knew that the streamer was about to reach Shangjing. Ancient roads were mostly dirt roads or gravel roads. The former was wet when it rained, and the latter was bumpy. It was a huge project to pave a road with bricks of the same size, and it cost a lot of money. It was impossible to find such a good road if it wasn't a capital city like Shangjing or a big city with a developed economy. Tujio Qi Fan, I just want to get into the city as soon as possible. I want to see Shangyang Palace, which the streamer said was Ling Shao Palace in heaven, Shangyang Palace on earth. I wonder how prosperous it is. I don't know if its scale is comparable to the Forbidden City. This is an authentic ancient palace building. Lao Ciji Lianming, come on,
Shangyang Palace is a royal palace. Ordinary people can't even get close to the palace walls, right? At most, they can see the prosperity of Shangjing. It's not possible to see the whole of Shangyang Palace. Host V. When the world is in my hands, you can see wherever you want. As soon as the words came out, the whole streaming room exploded. Streamer Zheng Shengwo, 666. Do you feel the happiness of being spoiled by the domineering streamer? In Yuejia Zhuge Qinma. Yes. Chun Lai. I'm so happy that I'm going to faint, okay? Zhuge Chesti. I've already fainted. I'm so happy that I don't want to get up. I need the streamer to kiss me to get up. Da Wang sends Walai Ponchen. That's really exciting. Streamer. Do you still need fangirls to warm your bed? Nai De Yida. Go away, you little demons. The streamer is obviously talking to me. Unruly people. With the audience in the streaming room joking around, the journey wasn't boring. It was even a little interesting. Jiang Pengji didn't have a good impression of streaming, but she liked some cute little angels in the streaming room. Just as the corners of her lips curled up into a faint smile, the feeling of being spied on suddenly entered her brain, which made her smile disappear. Without thinking, Jiang Pengji quickly pulled out the longbow that was placed on the back of the horse. She quickly put an arrow on the bowstring and drew the bow to a full moon. Pa! The noise made Lu Shi, who was in front of her, come to his senses. He turned his head and saw an arrow explode in the air. The remains fell to the ground. His daughter had not finished drawing the bow. Her expression was cold, and her dark eyes were filled with murderous intent. Lu Shi was about to speak. Lon. He saw his daughter draw the bow even faster. Before he finished speaking, an arrow had left the bowstring at the speed of lightning. Trash. Jiang Pengji looked coldly at the guy who was still smiling. His hair was blown away by the arrow. He looked panicked and lost. Although the other party didn't have murderous intent, it was full of malice to embarrass her. Since that was the case, she would give him a taste of his own medicine. Who asked that trash to have such a cheap hand? With a duong sound, the arrow steadily shot into the horizontal bar of the shaft of the carriage. The move alarmed the armored guards, and they all looked as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Lu Shi was surprised at first, but when he saw the arrow explode in the air after being shot by his daughter, he felt a lingering fear in his heart. He was furious. Cheng Cheng was a beat slower to react. His face suddenly turned pale. They didn't know the target of the arrow. They only knew that it was aimed at Jiang Pengji, so they subconsciously thought that the arrow was meant to kill her. Chapter 263. Ko Jiao Qifan. Damn, which bastard attacked the streamer? Doesn't he know that if he pisses off the streamer, she'll tear him apart with her bare hands? Tang roasted chestnut. I just blinked. What happened? It happened too fast. Jiang Pengji reacted in time to block the attack and retaliate. The viewers in the streaming room were all dumbfounded. At that moment, they wished there was a replay button so that they could go back a few seconds and see what happened in detail. Ko Jiao Qifan. A bastard attacked the streamer with a bow and arrow, but the streamer is indeed a beautiful woman. She shot the arrow in the air and blew it up. She even retaliated with an arrow. She's so handsome that I can't even close my legs. After being reminded, everyone looked at the shattered remains of the arrow on the ground. Through the live stream's perspective, they saw the coward who had his hair blown off. His face was full of panic. He fell to the ground and almost peed in his pants. They all gave Jiang Pengji a thumbs up. Well done. A huge wave of rewards flooded in. Jiang Pengji had foreseen this and temporarily turned off the backstage notification sound. The group of people seemed to have a powerful background. The owner of the carriage had an even more powerful background. The armored guards all stepped forward and surrounded Jiang Pengji's group as if they were facing a formidable enemy. However, the troops were not to be trifled with. They immediately pulled out their broadswords and confronted them. Seeing that someone was about to be killed, Cheng Cheng saluted the group with a gloomy face. He spoke in a clear voice, which almost made Lu Shi kneel. What does Prince Changsho mean by this? Ha! Prince Changsho? Lu Shi was confused, but on the surface, he looked cold and emotionless. His eyes kept drifting in the direction of the carriage. The person in the carriage couldn't sit still after Cheng Cheng called out his identity. He asked someone to lift the veil, revealing a face of about 30 years old. What happened? He asked his attendants as if he didn't know anything. Your Highness, 2 Langjuns used an object in the distance as a target for fun, but they didn't expect a commoner to pass by on a horse and block the object. That commoner is extremely daring. He attacked the Langjuns in public and even alerted Your Highness. The attendant's voice was shrill, which sounded very harsh. Prince Changsho snorted and said coldly, "A commoner attacking an aristocrat in broad daylight is a crime punishable by death." With just a few words, he had smoothed out the crisis that Jiang Pengji had faced previously. Instead, he had pinned a groundless crime on her head. At this moment, a young man who was accompanying them heard a familiar voice. He suddenly turned around, his eyes filled with surprise. He cupped his hands towards Prince Changsho and said, "Your Highness, the person who spoke just now is my nephew. Please allow me to go and understand the situation before making a decision." Prince Changsho was initially a little displeased. After all, when that arrow hit the shaft of his carriage, he was so frightened that his heart almost stopped. However, when he saw who the young man who spoke was, he silently suppressed his dissatisfaction, and a faint smile appeared on his frightened face. Yumo's nephew must be an outstanding talent. Why don't we call him closer? Without waiting for Prince Changsho to finish, Cheng Jing excused himself and rode forward, ordering the armored guards to put down their spears. Everyone stop. Seeing that Cheng Cheng wasn't injured, Cheng Jing felt slightly relieved. Wan Fu, long time no see. Lu Shi was dumbfounded. The young man in front of him was at most in his 20s. Why did he call Cheng Cheng by his courtesy name? After all, Cheng Cheng was a few years older than him. It's been a few months since we last met in Langia. It has indeed been a long time. Yumo, come, let me introduce you. This is the county chief of Hu County, Lu Zhongqing. He is one of the extraordinary people in Dongqing that you always talk about. Now that you've met him, aren't you excited? Cheng Jing was dumbfounded, and Lu Shi was even more dumbfounded. As for Jiang Pengji, she already didn't know what to say. What happened just now? Why did you have a conflict with Prince Changsho's guards? Cheng Cheng's face became gloomy again. Lu Shi's expression was even worse, which made Cheng Jing's heart skip a beat. TSK, let me tell you about it. Just now, there was a despicable person who aimed an arrow at my head. I only shot away his crown, which made him look like a clown. I was already being very polite. Why, Lang Jun? Do you want to reprimand me indiscriminately? Jiang Pengji urged her horse forward. She didn't have a good impression of Cheng Jing, or Cheng Yumo, whom Lu Shi had mentioned before. Cheng Jing looked embarrassed. Faced with Jiang Pengji's tough tone, he didn't get angry. Instead, he cupped his hands and asked, "May I know who this Lang Jun is?" Lu Shi put on a fake smile and said, "My only son. May I know the name of the despicable person just now?" He just wanted to make fun of them because they were tired from the long journey. Their clothes were unremarkable, and the decorations on their carriages were simple. If it were an ordinary merchant's carriage, they would probably have to swallow the humiliation. But since it was Lu Shi, the meaning was different. He deliberately emphasized the word, only, and Cheng Jing suddenly realized that it was a serious matter. You misunderstood me, Lang Jun. I am not the kind of person who does not distinguish between right and wrong. Cheng Jing smiled bitterly and said, I was chatting happily with my friend just now, and I didn't notice what was happening around me. By the time I realized it, Lang Jun had already made that person lose face. Lu Shi's son was almost shot to death on the official road outside of Shangjing. He couldn't imagine what would happen if that really happened. Serves him right for being despicable. Lang Jun, this has nothing to do with you. I won't ask you to speak for me, but I hope you won't plead for that person either. Jiang Pengji clicked her tongue. Although she didn't act arrogantly, her attitude was quite tough. A kind person would be bullied, and a kind horse would be ridden. The rule of the law of the jungle was even more straightforward in today's stratified society. If it wasn't her, but any other ordinary person, they would have fallen off the horse in fright. Maybe they would have been trampled by the horse's panicked hooves. White was a well-trained warhorse from the northern borderline. She had reacted calmly just now, which prevented a tragedy. Cheng Jing nodded and said, Of course. Cheng Cheng snorted and said disdainfully, Prince Changsho? Humph. Cheng Jing went back and told the identity of Lu Shi and his people.
Not only did Prince Changshuo's expression change, but his attitude was completely biased towards Lu Shi and his people. The young man who accompanied them also looked as pale as a sheet. The two Langjuns who had been joking with each other were trembling and their lips were pale. How could they have known that those ordinary people, who looked like commoners, had such a powerful background? Who asked you to be despicable? Who asked you to be despicable? Who asked you to be despicable? The young man who had shot the arrow looked at his own hand with tears in his eyes. He wanted to go back in time and slap himself. Who in Dongqing was the most dangerous person to offend? Lu Shi was definitely on the list. He was this year's General Evaluation Officer, and they had almost shot his son. How could they expect him to give them good results? To be more serious, Lu Shi only had to move his pen and give them a bad evaluation. Their careers would be over. Even if they didn't enter the officialdom, it would be impossible for them to be famous scholars with just a title. Obviously, Lu Shi was not such a generous person. Chapter 264. Lanting, you weren't scared, right? On the way into the city, Lu Shi and Cheng Cheng looked gloomy. The atmosphere around them was very oppressive, as if they were brewing anger. Cheng Cheng's wife, who was sitting in the carriage, knew about it. She quickly asked Jiang Pengji to stop riding and sit in the carriage for a while. She looked at Jiang Pengji carefully and was relieved when she was sure she was fine. These foppish boys are getting more and more presumptuous. They don't know the teachings of the saints. They are getting more and more unscrupulous just because they are protected by their ancestors. Fortunately, Lanting has excellent archery skills and Lu County Chief is watching over us. Otherwise, there would be another bloody case under the emperor's feet. Cheng Cheng's wife was very angry. She squeezed Jiang Pengji's hands and said, "Look at you. Your hands are cold." Jiang Pengji smiled weakly, as if she was pretending to be strong. Cheng Cheng's wife felt even more sorry for her. Jiang Pengji chose to ignore the comments from the audience in the streaming room that her acting skills were enough to win an Oscar. After a while, Jiang Pengji pulled her hands out of Cheng Cheng's hands. She looked obedient and said in a low voice, "Auntie, I wasn't scared. I was born this way." Born this way? It's normal for you to be full of vigor and young energy to be in your growing period. Yet your hands are so cold. It's obvious that you're overflowing with cold energy. Lu Zhongqing is indeed a man. He doesn't know how to raise a child. How can he be so careless? Cheng Cheng's wife raised her eyebrows. She was a little dissatisfied with Lu Shi. A man was indeed a man. He gave birth to a child but didn't take care of him. Poor Lu Shi lost his mother at such a young age. Who else would take care of a child so meticulously except for his biological mother? Jiang Pengji's smile froze a little, so Cheng Cheng's wife didn't notice it. "Didn't you ask a doctor to come to the mansion to recuperate?" Cheng Cheng's wife asked. Before Jiang Pengji could answer, she continued, "Lanting, you can't ignore your health just because you are young. If a man lacks yang energy and has too much yin energy, it will hinder the reproduction of his children. You are the only legitimate son of Lu County Chief. The heavy responsibility of raising a house is on your shoulders." Jiang Pengji was speechless. "Auntie, I do know a divine doctor of Xinglin, who is very knowledgeable about health. That person is currently in Shangjing. When everything settles down, Auntie will take you to have a look. You're still young, so you don't have to be so shy about this kind of thing. You should be magnanimous." When the gentle person chanted, the power was comparable to the band-tightening spell. Jiang Pengji could not do anything about it. Other than nodding his head in agreement, he would occasionally mumble something. After waiting for a while, the convoy was finally allowed to enter Shangjing. After passing through the Vermilion City Gate, the bustling ancient city was like a beautiful woman with a veil covering her face. After a bout of shyness and anger, she was finally willing to slowly lift a corner of her veil, revealing a beauty that could captivate even the birds and beasts, and outshine the moon and flowers. Lu Shi had sent a letter to Feng Ran a long time ago. He planned to stay and eat at Feng Ren's house for a while. Feng Ren also knew Lu Shi's temper. How could he refuse? As soon as they entered the city, a steward in fine clothes came forward and asked, "Are you from County Chief Lu's mansion?" "I am Lu Shi. I remember you, Shenda's manservant. Look at how you're dressed. You've been promoted." Lu Shi got off the horse. Even though he was facing a manservant, He did not have the arrogance of an ordinary aristocrat. The steward immediately felt honored, and a warm feeling flowed in his heart. He had been sent to wait for Lu Shi's carriage because he had seen Lu Shi's face before. He didn't expect Lu Shi to recognize him as well. It had to be known that this was a few years ago. At that time, the steward was just a servant who served tea. At that moment, the steward's face was full of smiles, and his attitude toward Lu Shi became more intimate. "Master has asked the mansion to prepare a courtyard for you. Please come with me." If Hejin County was said to be the pretty daughter of a humble family, then the prosperous and mighty Shangjing was said to be the daughter of a noble family who was dressed in luxurious clothes and had a head full of pearls and jade. She was graceful and elegant, and her appearance was so beautiful that it could cause the downfall of a city. At first glance, the houses were scattered in picturesque disorder, the streets were neat, and the people and merchants who came and went were dressed neatly. There was not a beggar in shabby clothes in the streets and alleys. It was as if this was what a prosperous ancient era should look like. But it was just as if. Jiang Pengji swept her gaze across. Her eyes, which were originally filled with some interest, suddenly became unhappy. "Let's go. I'll find out where Master Yuanjing is staying later. After a short rest, I'll bring you to visit him." Although he couldn't bear to part with his daughter, Lu Shi knew that he would only make things worse if he helped her. She could only walk down that path alone. If he took Yuanjing as his teacher, he would be able to make friends with many young elites. It would also be good for him to accumulate some capital in the future. At the very least, he would be able to keep a clean reputation. Jiang Pengji nodded. She had heard of Yuanjing's name for a long time. Now that she was about to meet him in person, she wanted to see what was so special about him. On the other side, Prince Changshuo's mood could be imagined after Lu Shi rudely brushed him off. He didn't look happy throughout the whole process. The foppish playboy was even more careful. His expression was as gloomy as a bitter gourd, as if he would pout and burst into tears in the next second. Cheng Jing was especially disdainful of his attitude. As a man, he dared to take responsibility for his actions. Since he had the guts to make fun of the commoners, he should have been mentally prepared to kick an iron plate. He was proud of himself when he bullied the commoners, but he panicked after offending Lu Shi. His ugly behavior made people want to vomit. Cheng Jing glanced at the gorgeously dressed Langjuns at the gathering. Yes, gorgeously dressed. There was nothing wrong with the phrase. He hadn't been to Shangjing for a few years, and the atmosphere there had changed. Not only did the men put on makeup, but they also drew on their eyebrows, painted their lips, and dyed their cheeks red. They even had to deliberately tighten their waists. They walked like willows swaying in the wind. Every one of them was more delicate than a girl. If it wasn't for the fact that the General Evaluation Officer, Lu Shi, didn't like men who were too delicate, their outfits would have been even more unsightly. Cheng Jing really couldn't talk to those people, so he just sat in the corner and slowly drank his tea to calm himself down. As for the two whimpering Langjuns in the distance, he felt like he would go blind if he looked at them for too long. "Yumo, why are you sitting here alone? Aren't you going to play with them?" As he was feeling depressed, a wisp of light fragrance hit him. A young man in a mint green shirt sat directly next to him. The newcomer was tall and slender. His skin was as delicate as flawless white porcelain. He didn't put on any makeup, but he was better than a girl. He had bright eyes, red lips, and white teeth. He was truly a handsome young man. Cheng Jing didn't bother to look up. He knew who it was just by listening to the voice. "What are you playing at? I don't want to look at you. My stomach still hurts. That's why you don't have your meals on time." Han Yu curled his lips and quickly took the fruit in front of Cheng Jing and stuffed it into his mouth. The slightly sour juice overflowed his mouth. He said with disgust, "I gave you such a raw fruit. No wonder you have a stomachache." Cheng Jing's mouth twitched, and he continued to drink his tea. Chapter 265. The host of the gathering was Prince Changshuo. The purpose of the gathering was for students to exchange knowledge, but in fact, it was to attract talented students. The Chengs and Prince Changshuo's relationship was somewhat indirect. Cheng Jing had to come because of his pride, but Han Yu didn't have that many concerns. "My teacher lost a game of chess with Zixiao and was urged to go to Jishan's hot spring today. I slept in for a while, but they didn't wake me up." Han Yu was depressed. His friends were going to exploit his teacher's money,
But he was left behind because he woke up late. Zixiao's chess skills have improved a lot. I can't believe he won a game against my teacher. Although Master Yuan Jing wasn't as good as the rumors said, his relative was proficient in calligraphy and painting. Any one of them could be regarded as a master. It wasn't difficult to be proficient in one of them, but it was difficult to be proficient in all of them. After all, a person's energy was limited. There was no other reason other than talent. Cheng Jing couldn't help but laugh. He understood Han Yu's depression. Ji Shan's hot spring was famous in Dongqing. Many gatherings were held there, and many students liked to go there. More importantly, it wasn't easy to make their teacher lose a game and pay for a student to go to the hot spring willingly. Han Yu muttered. Zixiao's chess skills are getting better. I felt like I was being led by the nose when I played a game with him yesterday. I was left alone by them. It was boring, so I came to find you. I saw that you had nothing to do at the gathering. It was boring. Cheng Jing shook his head and said, "It would be better for you to go to the brothel to have fun than here." Prince Changsho seemed to be kind, but he was secretly ambitious. He had his eyes on many talents from aristocratic families. Han Yu really shouldn't have come here. Unexpectedly, Han Yu said with a bitter face, "Go to the brothel? Let those girls look at me and have fun?" He wasn't bragging, but all the girls in Shangjing were not as good-looking as him. Cheng Jing was speechless. He had seen narcissistic people, but he couldn't stand Han Yu being so narcissistic every day. "Right, this is for you." Han Yu took out a piece of bamboo from his sleeve. "What's this?" Cheng Jing took it and saw that it was his teacher's handwriting, which said, "The examination question is out. My teacher left it for you. He said that you would know when you read it." "How would I know if you don't know?" Han Yu answered honestly. Cheng Jing's fingers traced the words on it. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind, and he suddenly understood. He was speechless. "This thing of yours came a little late," Cheng Jing said regretfully. Han Yu was confused and asked, "Do you know what the teacher is talking about?" "If I'm not wrong, he's probably referring to the General Evaluation Officer, Lu Zhongqing." The final exam question was set by the General Evaluation Officer. Lu Shi had not yet arrived in Shangjing, so no one knew what question he would set. The question had already been set, which actually implied that Lu Shi had already arrived. So, Lu Zhongqing has already arrived in Shangjing? It happened about 2 hours ago. Cheng Jing signaled Han Yu with his eyes. "Look at the two crying Langjuns over there. They were ignorant and offended County Chief Lu. Now they look sad. They are not hopeless. They know what will happen to them." Han Yu said, "I've met County Chief Lu. He's not as violent as the rumors say. He's a gentleman like the bright moon. He has a gentle temperament and treats people generously, not inferior to you, Yumo." What did they do? How could they offend County Chief Lu who had just arrived in Shangjing? The exam was just around the corner, and they had the courage to offend the General Evaluation Officer. It was true that the General Evaluation Officer had to be fair and impartial. He couldn't be partial to anyone, but it was easy to kill someone. It was no wonder that the two looked like they had lost their parents. Without a strong enough background, they shouldn't have confronted Lu Shi at this time. They amused themselves with the passers-by. They didn't expect that the Lang Jun of County Chief Lu's family would pass by on a horse in plain clothes. They thought that he was a pushover and almost killed him. County Chief Lu only had one son. How could he not be angry? Han Yu was stunned and it took him a long time to react. "Wait, who did you say that they almost killed? Did he hear it wrong?" Cheng Jing was quite confused. Han Yu's reaction was a little too extreme. He repeated, "The Lang Jun of County Chief Lu." Han Yu was speechless. "Wenbin, what's wrong?" Cheng Jing couldn't help but ask. "The Lang Jun of County Chief Lu's family. He is a devil. He is more difficult to deal with than County Chief Lu." Han Yu took a deep breath and said, "If they offended County Chief Lu, they would at most give them a warning for the sake of their reputation. But that Lang Jun kills without spilling blood." Cheng Jing was doubtful and couldn't believe it. How could it be? Judging from his behavior, he doesn't look like a person who cares about every little thing. Han Yu used to think so too. Until he left Hejian County, he heard all kinds of rumors one after another. Not to mention anything else, just the fact that he dared to go against all the laws of the world,
implemented the purchase restriction under the pressure of many aristocratic families, and even provoked many aristocratic families in Hejin County. Han Yu didn't dare to look down on the Lang Jun of the Lu County chief's family. After asking Feng Jin for confirmation, Feng Jin gave him a firm answer that the purchase restriction must have been set by Lu Shi. It was not a big deal to seek death. It was a real ability to live well after seeking death. Let's wait and see. Those two are going to be unlucky. They will at least be hurt. Han Yu curled his lips as if he was watching a good show. His eyes were sparkling. Cheng Jing was speechless. He didn't know whether he was wrong about Lu Shi or Han Yu. Oh, I almost forgot something important. Han Yu quickly sat up straight. He suddenly remembered something important. Lu Lanting came to Shangjing with his father to find a master and study in Langyi Academy. According to County Chief Lu's style, he will go to the master as soon as he settles down. If I go there now, I might see something interesting. Cheng Jing smiled. Master said a long time ago that he will only accept 4 disciples in his life. Now that the 4 are here, there are no more places. There was still hope for studying, but it was impossible for him to become a disciple. His master looked not only for talent but also for fate. Han Yu said as if he wanted to see the world in chaos. That's why it's worth watching. This gathering is so boring. It's either I flatter you or you flatter me. It's so boring. Instead of wasting time here, it's better to go and see that young Lang Jun. When are you going to rein in your jumpy temperament? Although that was what he said, Cheng Jing was already convinced. He had had enough of this boring gathering. Instead of wasting time here, it was better to go to Jishan Hot Spring to drink, appreciate the flowers through the fog, and talk about poetry and painting. Jishan Hot Spring? Jiang Pengji arrived at the Lu mansion. She thought she would see her friend Feng Jin, who she hadn't seen for a long time, but she was told that he had gone to Jishan Hot Spring to enjoy himself. Chapter 266. I really can't tell that you're actually this kind of Yuan Jing. When Lu Shi found out where Master Yuan Jing was staying, he found out from the boy servant that Master Yuan Jing had brought a group of students to Jishan to soak in the spring. It was estimated that they would be soaking for a few days. Lu Shi, who had come empty-handed, had a slightly cracked expression on his face. Was he supposed to wait for a few days? In that room, Lu Shi was extremely depressed. Why was he depressed? He could not possibly bring his daughter to the hot spring to look for Master Yuan Jing, could he? Although hot springs were also divided into male and female hot springs, they were separated. Not only that, but in recent years, the culture had gradually become more conservative, and the status of women had been declining at a speed visible to the naked eye. The belittling of women in the outside world had also caused their freedom to be restricted, which led to the cold weather. Most of the people who went to the spring were men, and there were almost no women. Even if there were women, most of them would be noble women of noble families. There would be people following them in and out to avoid accidents. Wasn't it ridiculous to ask Lu Shi to bring his daughter to a men's spa just to find Yuan Jing? However, if he did not look for Yuan Jing, he could only wait until he was done playing with his students and left Jishan. If Master Yuan Jing was so powerful, why didn't he predict his plan? Why did he choose to soak in the spring at this critical moment? Annoying Omega. Lu Shi silently hated Yuan Jing for a while. He sighed and continued to think of a solution. Before he could come up with a solution, Feng Ren took the initiative to invite Lu Shi to Jishan's hot spring to relax. He had even thought of a reason. The assessment is around the corner. The young talents of Dongqing will gather in Shangjing. These days, all kinds of scholarly gatherings and poetry gatherings are happening one after another. Zhongqing is always busy with work, so he should take a break from time to time. Ji Mountain is a popular place for scholarly gatherings and poetry gatherings. Why don't we go together? Although he said that he was fooling around, he could actually take the opportunity to visit Dongqing Jun incognito and see what kind of person he was in the examination hall. Lu Shi pursed his lips and didn't say anything. When did the secretariat become so free? Judging from Feng Ren's familiarity with the hot spring, he was probably a regular customer of Jishan's hot spring, the kind that would go there every few days. On the other hand, Lu Shi was only the county chief of Hu County, but he had been busy for a few years. He worked day and night, and he didn't even have a holiday. He took the salary of a county governor and did the workload of an emperor. Feng Ran was one of the top head of the secretariat, a real high-ranking official. How could he be so free? After hesitating for a while, Lu Shi decided to ask for his daughter's opinion. If she said yes, then he would go. If not, then he would wait a few more days. Needless to say, Jiang Pengji's answer was to go. Why not? Jiang Pengji asked Lu Shi. Lu Shi opened his mouth but couldn't utter a word. That's right, why not? But daughter, you are a daughter. Lu Shi's mind was in a mess. He felt that he and his daughter were thinking about different things. Due to geographical reasons, there were many natural hot springs in the northern part of Dongqing. Among them, Mount Ji, which was near Shangjing, had the highest concentration. During the Great Xia dynasty, the royal family had built a hot spring palace in Ji Mountain, and several generations of emperors had expanded it. Those emperors held the hot spring in high esteem. Many books and unofficial histories even believed that the hot spring had the miraculous effect of increasing one's lifespan, prolonging one's life, and curing all kinds of diseases. It was also respectfully called the immortal spring by many common people. Whether it was the royal family or the common people, they loved the hot spring very much. Especially in late autumn, they couldn't wait to move. After the fall of the Great Xia dynasty, the world was divided. Dongqing established the dynasty with Shangyang County as its capital, which was now called Shangjing. Mount Ji, which had many hot springs, was near Shangjing. It only took 1 to 4 hours to get there by horse carriage. The distance was short and it was very convenient. The royal family of Dongqing took advantage of the previous dynasty. They slightly renovated the original hot spring palace and changed it into a new royal palace. Because 2 or 3 generations of emperors of Dongqing were incompetent, their goals in life were to seek pleasure and pleasure. Naturally, they paid great attention to the hot spring palace that brought them joy. They visited it 4 times a year, and each visit lasted at least a month. Each visit was a waste of manpower and money. There were many hot springs in the Ji mountain range. The largest area was occupied by the royal family and became the Royal Hot Spring Palace. The other areas were occupied by various aristocratic families and wealthy merchants. They were converted into hot spring hotels of different sizes and served different guests. The rich and powerful could enjoy quality service, and the common people could also experience hot spring in ordinary hot spring hotels. Therefore, when the weather was cold, the hot spring hotels were especially popular. Mount Ji's hot spring was not just a place to soak in hot springs. After many years of development, it had long become a tourist attraction centered around the hot spring. Not only could one soak in hot springs, but there were also wine shops, tea houses, restaurants, and shops that sold all kinds of exquisite small goods. In addition, there were many scholars and beautiful ladies who held elegant poetry gatherings. There were even many brothels and brothels. At night, it was as bright as day. The Feng family's horse carriage drove all the way from the foot of the mountain to the mountainside. Finally, it stopped in front of an extremely luxurious mansion. When they got out of the carriage, there were already many luxurious horse carriages parked neatly around it. Upon closer inspection, there were all kinds of family emblems on the carriages. If it wasn't for Xianda leading the way, I would have thought that this was a mansion of a noble family. I couldn't tell that it was a hot spring hotel. Other than the common people, the other gentry families didn't build hot spring hotels to make money. They built them to provide a place for their children to have fun and enjoy themselves. The hot spring hotel that Lu Shi saw was many times more luxurious and larger than his Lu mansion. Extravagant and luxurious. Other than these 4 words, he couldn't think of a better way to describe it. This is under the name of Prince Changsho. It's said that it was built according to his mansion. During the evaluation month, it's open to all young talents for free. That's why it's the place that holds the most gatherings and poetry events. The more the merrier, the more the merrier. I'm just here to join in the fun. Lu Shi was speechless. Jiang Pengji, who was behind him, secretly chuckled. She didn't expect that such a mature guy like Feng Jin would have such an interesting father. Feng Ren's words were very clear. He came because the hot spring hotel was luxurious and exquisite, and it didn't cost him any money. Prince Changsho. Lu Shi frowned. He's so brazenly trying to win me over. He's really ambitious. Lu Shi had spent all his energy on Hu County in the past few years. He didn't pay much attention to the various forces in the court.
Even though Gu Min had told him that Prince Changsha would be one of the contenders for the throne in the future, Gu Min's history was not good. She only remembered that the guy had been eliminated very quickly and was a coward who was too soft to listen to. The only famous advisor under him was Qiguan Rang. All this information had led Lu Shi astray. He had the impression that Prince Changsha was the same, cowardly, weak and useless. Feng Ren coughed and said in a low voice, "Let's go to the hot spring first before we talk about this." They picked up their bowls to eat meat and put down their chopsticks to curse. They hadn't enjoyed the free hot spring provided by Prince Changsha, so they didn't talk about it for the time being. If they wanted to talk about it, they had to wait until they enjoyed the hot spring. Lu Shi was speechless. Chapter 267. There were basically no rules for ordinary people to soak in the hot spring, but it was different for the gentry. In order to reflect their status, there were rules everywhere. Jiang Pengji was led to a courtyard by the servant girl of the hot spring hotel. First, she had to burn incense and bathe from head to toe. Her hair had to be carefully washed. More than 50 kinds of spices were ground into powder and placed in exquisite powder boxes of the same size for the guests to use. She rejected the servant girl of the hot spring hotel and entered the bath that was about 3 to 4 square meters to take a bath. She quickly wet her hair and washed it. The clothes that she wore after the bath were folded neatly and placed aside. The material was smooth and airtight, and there was a faint orchid fragrance on it. From the cloth to the clothes, it would only be worn by one guest once. After changing it, it had to be burned. It could not be recycled a second time. Not to mention other things, just this alone was shockingly expensive. Similarly, it was shockingly extravagant. Jiang Pengji got out of the bath and slightly wiped the water droplets on her body. Then, she wrapped the bulge in front of her chest tightly with the belt around her chest. Finally, she picked up the snow-white clothes and put them on. She used the same snow-white belt to tie a knot around her waist. Fortunately, the culture of this era was more conservative. Even if it was a hot spring, few people would be shirtless. Otherwise, Jiang Pengji would be able to see a shining white body. She was not shy, but she could not stand the extremely deformed bodies. It was an eyesore. Although it was just a hot spring hotel, since it was built according to the model of Prince Changsha's mansion, it was naturally extravagant. Pavilions, corridors, pavilions, buildings, platforms, halls, and halls were all available. There were open waterside pavilions on the hot spring or on higher ground. After bathing, one could have a drink or two there and look into the distance. The hot spring was of different sizes. Each hot spring was separated by exquisite rockery, waterside pavilions, and pine and cypress trees. Although it was open, it also protected privacy. When bathing in the hot spring, one could look up at the sky. It made one's mind open, and it was a different feeling. Dense steam rose from the water surface. The sound of musical instruments entered one's ears. There was endless singing and laughter, as if there were people chatting and laughing. Indistinctly, there were the silhouettes of people drinking with each other. It was ethereal like a fairyland on earth. Lu Shi and Feng Ren had already cleaned up. One of them was taking a nap in the spring, while the other was drinking tea by the shore. They seemed to be discussing something. When Jiang Pengji came over, Lu Shi hurriedly said to her, "I still have something to discuss with the head of the secretariat." Lanting, go to another room. What a joke! That was a daughter, not a son. Jiang Pengji responded with a sound of agreement and allowed the servant girl to lead her to another unoccupied hot spring. Along the way, she saw many men who looked to be in their teens or 20s. Their faces were painted with exquisite makeup, and their lips were painted with rouge. Under the rising mist, their figures appeared graceful due to their delicate steps. Not only that, these people's clothes were always loose, revealing most of their chests. She silently moved her eyes away and clicked on the live stream. Eyes, I can't let her be the only one to suffer. Only a good host can bear hardships together. She gave herself a like, and the viewers in the stream were speechless. Originally, he thought that the live broadcast would be taking a break for a day. He didn't expect that the other party would start without warning, and the live broadcast was so unbearable. Lao Ciji Lianming. Host, are you ready to drive? They didn't mind seeing the host pressing the handsome young man to the ground and ravaging him, but they did mind seeing a group of fat men with big ears,
ordinary looks, and bodies full of fat torturing their eyes in front of the camera. In this world that values appearance, can you not be so cruel? Dashu Xiaobing. My eyes are going blind. Host, you are so cruel. Can you imagine? A fat pig in his 20s, whose height and body width were almost the same, walking with his waist, twisting and turning like an orchid? It's fine if his chest is exposed, but where are his abdominal muscles and mermaid lines? They only see black chest hair, a bulging belly, and greasy fat. Oh, and a big cleavage. Jube Chestnut. I looked at that uncle's chest and then looked down at mine. I suddenly feel that I don't deserve to be a woman. My roommates always laugh at me for being flat-chested. I used to deny it, but now I can only cry and admit. I am flat-chested. Tang Chao Chestnut. #perverted. Speaking of which, I haven't seen the host's chest yet. Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows and walked past the man with the big cleavage without changing her expression. Her chest. How should she put it? When she saved Cheng Cheng, the system gave her a reward, plump and milky breasts. Raise your wrists high and turn your body, and let your breasts cover your clothes. Under Jiang Pengji's persuasion, the system didn't directly send the reward to her. Instead, it sent it to the backstage in the form of a card. Of course, she didn't use it. Lu Shi's body was only 12 years old, and there were still 3 to 4 months before he turned 13. Why would he need breasts when he was so young? Give me some sake. She pushed open the door that only served as a cover and entered. There was a small hot spring that was 5 or 6 square meters in size. In the center of the hot spring stood a graceful stone statue of a fairy flying in the sky. The statue's palms and fluttering clothes were cleverly changed into plates for serving tea and wine. The servant bowed and left after receiving the order. Jiang Pengji first tested the temperature of the hot spring with her fingertips, then she put her feet in and sat by the spring. There were also 2 delicately shaped stone lions by the spring. They carried trays on their heads, and visitors could place food on them while enjoying the hot spring leisurely, enjoying the delicacies, and admiring the beautiful scenery around them. To be honest, Jiang Pengji came from the distant future. As the head of the army, she had never experienced such luxurious service. The people in the ancient times really knew how to enjoy themselves. They used limited resources to make themselves live well. The service in the hot spring restaurant was very good. Not long after, 2 pretty maids came in one after the other with sake and cups. They put down the items in their hands after getting Jiang Pengji's permission. Throughout the whole process, they did not make a single sound. At that time, the door was still open, and Jiang Pengji could see what was happening in the waterside pavilions outside. She pointed outside and asked one of the servants, "Not only do you have soaking soup here, but you also provide other things." The servant had a gentle and appropriate smile on her lips. She followed Jiang Pengji's line of sight, and her pretty face suddenly turned pale. The other servant was afraid that she would say something wrong, so she hurriedly said with a smile, "If you like it, I am naturally willing to serve you, Lang Jun." The servants were all carefully selected. Whether it was their appearance, the way they spoke, or the way they walked, they all looked like they had been measured with a ruler. In a place like the hot spring, although they were dressed very tightly, in front of a group of men who only wore a layer of clothing, it was more likely to cause an adrenal response. Of course, they were all literate people, so they wouldn't force themselves on them, but it was inevitable that they would take advantage of them. Frankly speaking, in the eyes of the men who came to the hot spring to enjoy themselves, these servants were not much nobler than the ladies in the brothels. Jiang Pengji curled her lips and revealed an indescribably frivolous smile. The servant didn't understand. She thought that Jiang Pengji wanted them to serve her, but then she saw Jiang Pengji pull her feet out of the water. She lifted a jar of wine with one hand, opened the seal, raised her head, and directly poured the entire jar of wine into her mouth. Occasionally, some of the wine dripped from her chin and slid down her neck. The 2 maids were a little stunned. They had never seen a Lang Jun drink so boldly and unrestrainedly. Jiang Pengji looked down at them with a clear look. "I am drunk." It was time to settle the score. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.